In the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon Sûl, they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gil-galad out of the west in the days of the last alliance. I'm guest co-host, Deacon Seraphim Richard Rohlin, and you are listening to the Amon Sûl podcast.
Hi, Govanan. Welcome to Amon Sûl, a podcast for tall hobbits with elvish aspirations. I'm Father Anthony, an Orthodox Christian priest, and here we talk about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien because we love them and believe in their power to orient us toward what is highest and noblest. Today, my guest co-host is Deacon Seraphim Richard Rohlin, who is surely tremendously well known to all of you here at Amon Sûl, as his voice was heard here once a month for, I think, 4 full years, as he walked many of you through the dark valleys and tree-lit cities. Tree-lit? Did I write that? Of the Silmarillion. Deacon Seraphim, welcome back to your erstwhile home.
Richard Rohlin, I was, but I have come back to you at the turning of the tide. As Deacon Seraphim, well, the white, because I am the whitest person most people will ever meet. But yeah, it's so nice to be here. And it's very strange to think about all the things that have changed in the year that it's been now since we handed off the podcast to you.
I am hoping we can talk about some of those things and just hear a little bit. I don't think you're allowed to say you're Deacon Seraphim the White until you actually have some white in the beard. But
yeah, well, the camera is deceptive, but actually most of the hair on my head is turned white already.
Oh my goodness! Well,
it's been a year.
Between children and parish and your many projects, I can only imagine. One thing I did notice as you did the introduction, I like how you still are pronouncing Elendil and, well, Elendil, but Gil-galad as opposed to Gil-galad. There was a way that I read these things when I was a child, yes. and it's still stuck in my head, even though I've been around other people enough that then I start to question and second guess and think, are my accents wrong? And I appreciate that you're... I can't say Elendil and Gil-galad, but I know it's Elendil and Gil-galad, but...
yes. Well, when I was a child and I was reading the books, I was always trying to sort of scan the poetry. Mm-hmm. So the song about Gil-galad that Sam recalled, that's the first time that I can remember coming across something in Lord of the Rings, as I was reading it through the first time and being like, holy cow, this is something totally different from any book I've ever read. It was that moment when he sings that song. And so I remember trying to come up with the tune for it in my head. And I guess the tune went, Gil-galad was an elven king, not Gil-galad was an elven king. Anyway, so it's just how I still say the things in my mind. And the argument that I would make is that there are, of course, many dialects spoken in Middle-earth. And one would assume, therefore, several different variations in pronunciation. However, there are no surviving native Sindarin speakers, which obviously should be said something like Sindarin. But if you were to do that, nobody would invite you over to their house again. So I think that, like it's, you just have to say, listen, there's no native speakers of this language around today, so,
So Gil-galad is as justifiable and defensible as Augustine, as opposed to Augustine or Avgustinos. Yeah.
Well, where I live, Augustine is a kind of grass, and Augustine is the North African bishop. That's the delineation. But yes, it's funny. Any place named after St. Augustine in the South is called St. Augustine. And there's a grass, San Augustine or St. Augustine.
Sure.
It's kind of grass. So yeah. Dialect is a thing. It's a real thing. And not just dialect, but idiolect. And especially when you have an introverted youngster reading the books on his own and he's got nobody in his life to talk to him about these things. And you just have to come up with ways to say these words. At least you had brothers, to talk to you about this stuff.
Sure, that's fair. I have to say, you have just provided the most eloquent defense of what I was criticized for under the term homeschool mouth that I've ever heard. And I wish you would write that down so that every homeschooler forever is told that their way of pronouncing things, it's okay.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because, of course, as a homeschooler, I read a lot of books just quietly, and then you would say a word. People are like, "What word are you saying?" And then you'd eventually figure out, okay. So it really becomes a problem when you can't be understood anymore. I think when it undermines your ability to effectively communicate.
Fair enough.
I would argue that's when it actually matters that maybe there might be a right way to say it. But yes, I think that for every homeschooler out there who's listening into this and has a few quirky way they say words, the good news is people who go to public school don't even know those words. So pick one or the other.
Fair enough. At any rate, on our episode today, Deacon Seraphim and I will follow the Hobbits out of the common room of the Prancing Pony and back to their parlor, where we will find that they have been followed by someone else besides us. But before we do all that, we need to spend some time getting to know our guest, co-host, by asking him some questions. Now, please don't worry, we won't ask any of the usual questions, because I think, Deacon Seraphim, your answers to all of these are fairly well known at this point. But I'd love to hear how this past year has been for you, what you've done with all that free time since you laid aside this particular burden. Have you managed to keep all of your digits intact in the course of the loss?
Well, the fingers are all here, but quite frankly, it's been a crazy year. So we stepped aside, Father Andrew and I stepped aside from doing the Amon Sûl podcast because we wanted to start The Great Tales, which is going great. Mm-hmm. It's been a ton of fun. It really allows me to kind of dig deep into my archives of books and poetry and old stories and things like that I've been reading and studying and making notes about for a long time, just as long as I've been reading Tolkien, actually, and in most cases. And I get to share those with Father Andrew and with all of you, and that's been really, really lovely. One of the unexpected changes that also happened in the course of things, not long after I laid aside the Amon Sûl podcast, was that a sewage line, two things happened within the course of 2 weeks of each other. Like a year and 3 days ago now, my youngest daughter, Olga Maria, was born. Mm-hmm.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. This is child number 6. Mm. And then 2 weeks later, 2 days after Christmas, a sewage line backed up into our house and flooded it with sewage in the middle of the night. Mm. And we woke up to ankle deep, gray water. Mm-hmm. And we had to move out of our house the very same day. We had to go live in a hotel and then a succession of Airbnbs while they basically stripped our house down to studs and rebuilt it. Wow. And this took 4 months. So we moved out 2 days after Christmas. We moved back in on Holy Thursday, which also, as a subdeacon, was a fairly busy day for me. Mm-hmm. As you can imagine. So that was how this year began. And I think in many respects, we haven't fully recovered from that. But the other things that have been going on is that I've been, continuing my work with Ancient Faith on the Great Tales podcast. I've been running the Symbolic World Press, which is a publishing company that I own with Jonathan Pajot. Mm-hmm. And we've been making some really beautiful books this year.
They've been magnificent, just gorgeous.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. I've had several wonderful speaking engagements and travel and things like that. In addition to which, I have also had a 40-hour-a-week day job. Turns out this is too much. Mm-hmm. And so I was pushing. And this last week, I finally turned in my notice at the day job. So God willing, in the new year, I will just be focused on doing what my friend Dr. Martin Shaw likes to call listening to the music of what is, and doing the things that I feel that I'm made for, doing the things that will be ultimately more in service of the church, and I'll get to go back to working at home, which is something I really miss doing, and I'll get to see my family more. So
beautiful.
All that being said, when we initially tried to schedule this recording, I think there were maybe 2 different reschedulings, but one of them was because I turned in my notice and then immediately felt super, super sick and came home crashed in bed with what I thought was like the ultra flu, but it turns out to have been a combination of an ordinary cold plus strep.
Oh, delightful.
Both of those things at the same time. And so I was like, the last time we were supposed to record this, I was super sick, unconscious, in bed, not even aware of what time it was. So that the body keeps the score, as they say.
Yes.
And if you overwork yourself enough for long enough, eventually you have to sleep, and your body will figure out a way to get that out of you. Now, the other obviously really big thing that has happened since the last time I made an episode of this podcast was my ordination to the diaconate.
Axios, Capanda Axios.
Yeah, thank you. So that happened in May, and that's been wonderful. I mean, I think other than my wedding, probably the greatest day of my life. I mean, it was just very heavy grace, and there's been a lot of rough times recently, just things going on and the difficulties of ministry and all those things. But as you well know, that is a day you can look back on and just sort of anchor yourself to and say, yeah, this is who I am.
Yeah, and it continues. Well, glory to God. If I may ask, would you want to give any teasers for the work that you have coming up with any of those things? Anything people should be looking forward to?
So in the short term, one of the things that I'll be doing next year is making quite a lot more content for Ancient Faith. So we'll be doing two things here in particular, and then a bunch of other probably side projects. One of them is going to be a big hagiographical project. So some people, if you've been watching The Orthodox Pilgrim, which is where Father Andrew and I went together with a couple of other friends to Scotland and Northumbria. And one of the things that we did there was to record lives of saints, St. Columba and St. Aidan and St. Cuthbert and St. Oswald and so on, at the sites where those saints themselves actually lived and worked out their salvation, where they ministered, where they died, where their relics still remain in some cases. So the saints' lives that we recorded were saints' lives that I wrote specifically for that journey. And what I am planning on doing is really expanding this project and writing new hagiography for all the major saints of the British Isles and probably some others that are kind of British Isles adjacent. And we'll be releasing those for the most part on the feast days of those saints throughout the year 2026.
That's beautiful.
And it is, I have to say that writing hagiography is something that I discovered this back when I was working on The Wolf and the Cross with Father Andrew. That I just really, really loved doing it. It's an aesthetic discipline. It is to storytelling, what iconography is to painting. You can take all the things that make you a good painter, but in good iconography, they're purified and they're elevated in some way. And hagiography is that for storytelling. And I'm not a good painter, despite many attempts to be so. And not really a great musician, again, despite many attempts to be so. But I really love telling stories. And it's something I've, been blessed to have some success in doing. And so I'm going to be focused on a lot of hagiography in the coming year. And in many cases, there are good hagiographies for these saints, but the problem is they're all quite old and very, often very difficult for modern Orthodox Christians to sort through. So I'll be writing those and then also recording them, and maybe at someday they'll be compiled into a book if it's blessed. The other big project that I'll be doing is going to be a series tentatively entitled How to Be an Orthodox Christian. But basically, it will be taking the catechetical work that I do at St. Seraphim Orthodox Cathedral here in Dallas and putting it into a series of videos plus handouts and lesson plans. And the idea is not to replace the role of the parish priest as catechist, just to be very clear, but it is to offer kind of a force augmentation. This is not going to be like Deacon Seraphim's secret paywalled catechesis. This will just be free. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on Ancient Faith's channel. But I really have two people in mind for this. One would be the priest who's not able to teach year round. Most parishes don't have a catechism class every Sunday like my parish does. And so this will be basically like a 50 video series. So it'll be, significant amount of content that you can recommend to your parishioners. But then the other idea is that it's going to be focused on the really practical aspects. I really firmly believe that Orthodoxy is a lived faith. It's something that's lived in a community. So we're going to focus on that. Most of the stuff that is out there online basically amounts to apologetics or debates or, things like that have very little to do actually with what your life is supposed to look like lived out day to day. And so I'm kind of taking all the questions that I get as a catechist and try to feed it into my notes in terms of these are the things that I think it would be important to know, things I wish people had told me in my first few years as an Orthodox Christian,
Yeah.
And the very first lesson will be the very first class that I do every year, which is here's how you walk into church.
Yeah.
Here's why the church is laid out the way it is. Here's what the icons mean. Here's why people are bowing and crossing at certain times. Here's how you should dress. Here's how you will be expected to behave, things like that. And what I find is it's not burdensome to tell people these things very often. They're actually very nervous until you tell them.
Yeah.
It's okay. There are some expectations, but it's probably not what you think it is.
Yeah. There's a relief there.
Yeah, of just like knowing what you're expected to do and feeling like, okay, I can do that. I can handle that. I can belong. So those are the two big projects I'll be doing for Ancient Faith. In addition to that, I have some major storytelling projects for the symbolic world that I'll be starting this next year. I don't think any of them will be published in the coming year because what we found is to make books, especially the kind of high production value, really beautiful books that we make, from the moment the manuscript is turned in until the book actually hits the warehouse is about a 6-month process.
Sure.
And so before then, not only does the writing have to be done, but also if you have a book that's very heavy on illustrations, as these books will be, it's going to take quite a bit of time to put them together. So there'll probably be a lot of writing in 2026 and then publishing in 2027. But the series is a storytelling component, which is always the telos of the whole Universal History series, was to try to do something like the medieval romancers did, which is to, you have these medieval romances. Some of them are incredibly long. One of my favorites is about 1 million words, as a result of which it's never been translated into modern English because it's just too long and too boring to most modern people. But as a romance, it basically covers everything from the fall of Troy to Alexander to Arthur and basically interconnects and interweaves all those stories. I mean, that's not in any way exceptional. That's what all the medieval storytellers are doing.
So since you mentioned this real quick, just in case there is some magnificent person that has time and decides to tackle that 1 million word challenge, what's the romance called? What's the author?
Well, the author is unknown and the name is in Middle French.
Fair enough.
So I'm trying to remember what it's usually called. So you put me on the spot there for a Middle French name. If you go look up the earliest occurrence of the tale that eventually becomes Sleeping Beauty, it is in this romance.
All right.
So, in fact, we mentioned it in our Sleeping Beauty episode that we did on the Great Tales recently, and I'm blanking out on the name right now because I'm tired.
I picked on you, so forgive me.
No,
anyway.
Okay. So what I want to do is undertake a storytelling endeavor that will cover the entire golden thread of myth and legend in an interconnected way from Jason and the Argonauts to the death of Arthur. And this will be 20-something books, but it will be done as a story. And we'll also include like explanatory materials the same way we're doing with the fairy tales. But I'm going to focus on retelling the stories in an interconnected way, basically the way that a medieval romancer would tell them, but with some concessions to modern tastes, let's say. And so that's the big project. And the idea is that the kids who grow up reading our fairy tale books, when they're a little bit older, this is the next thing for them to read. So it'll have, very similar quality books, but they'll be longer, probably a higher word to illustration ratio, but still lots of beautiful illustrations by the same great artists who make all of our stuff look so amazing. So I'm very excited about it. I have right now an almost finished retelling of The Hunt for the Caledonian Boar, which is a story which is almost unknown to modern people. In fact, I would bet money that your average person who thinks they're really into mythology hasn't even read that story, maybe not even heard of it.
I believe I heard you giving a snippets of a rendition of that around the campfire at the Lord of Spirits conference.
Yes, you did.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, I'm nearly finished with that, and then I also have several other stories that I've been working on that will be part of the series. And right now I'm hopping around a little bit, but after the first of the year, I've got to actually buckle down, get focused. But that project will be called The Age of Heroes.
Glorious.
it's going to be pretty awesome. It's going to be pretty awesome. One of the stories I hope to include in there is the burning or the destruction of Dajerga's hostel, which is one of the Irish sagas of the Ulster cycle. And again, not well known to people who, think that they like mythology. Not casting aspersions at anybody. It's just not well known.
Sure.
But it's a really cool story. I mean, it's all about broken oaths and like violated geishas, like taboos and creeping doom and all those things. Very much the kind of story Tolkien would have enjoyed. That's one of the ones that I hope to be in there. But I was still sick this last week, and so I did what most people do when they are sick, and that is I sat down and I wrote a retelling of it for my kids, which I read to them the other night, and it was pretty great. So
awesome.
Anyway, lots of storytelling to happen in the new year, lots of speaking engagements, plenty of places people can come and hear me talk if they're so inclined. All that will be, announced somewhere on the internet. So,
any small plans and goals and projects? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, I've got other big things too. Like it's kind of exhausting to even kind of talk about it all. But one of the, you say, smaller things I'm really excited about is getting back to running some games. There's not really. This has been a really rough season of life for hobbying. So I am really looking forward to getting back to running some RPGs. I'm looking forward to getting back to running. I had a really great. Massive multiplayer one-to-one time Warhammer Crusade going on, which I'm looking forward to getting back to running. I have a great old school D&D style campaign I'm looking forward to getting to running. And I would like to publish another, I guess that's the other thing, is that right now there's a last chance backer kit for, in fact, I think it runs through just the end of the month, but there's a last chance backer kit for my Emboria Role-Playing in the World Under Starlight, which is my fantasy setting and RPG, which will be printing in January. So this is like the last chance to get a copy before it prints. And but we're already making plans on publishing another Emboria book next year. So anyway, I'm going to be writing books, telling stories, running games, and I may even mow the lawn. But
what a blessing! So what you're finding, it sounds like, is that as we mature, nothing happens quickly, and you have to start laying plans years before to see things come to fruition.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is maybe a fitting reflection for our topic as we encounter the long-lived and very patient Strider. Before we get to that, I have one more question that I probably shouldn't ask, but on the podcast, we've spent 4 episodes talking about the Tom Bombadil chapters, one for each chapter, and then an additional wrap-up. And I went into those chapters, those episodes, basically determined not to let my pet theory from my childhood take over, and to just view Tom and Goldberry as enigmatic characters that Tolkien puts in for thematic reasons or something, and reading the chapters slowly, talking about them with people that absolutely disagreed with me, really only just threw me back into that idea. So anyway, I want your thoughts on it, because basically I'm hoping someone can free me of this bondage to the idea that Tom Bombadil is Aule the Smith incognito, and that Yavanna is his spouse. That Goldberry is his spouse Yavanna. See, but it's so embedded. I identify them almost automatically. So I don't think you've listened, so I'll sum it up. The reason that I think this is not just that they have an intrinsic power that is beyond what we see anyone else exhibiting, and specifically a power of song and of vision, but also the manner in which they interact, the absolute eschewing of control or domination of any other living thing, and the relationship that they have. It, at the very least, resonates with the relationship that we see Tolkien depict of Aule and Yavanna, and shows perhaps a peace and harmony arrive in that relationship that is very much absent in the Silmarillion chapters, and that I think one grieves the absence of that harmony reading Aule, eager to see his dwarves cutting down Yavanna's forests, and Yavanna eagerly finding the Ents to come and prevent that. And the final word we hear, nonetheless they will have need of wood from Aule is just a sad place to leave that. So this may be wishful thinking, but at any rate, that is my question for you. Feel free to rip me apart.
Okay, so I have to say, when I came out, because yes, I have not listened to the last few episodes, not out of a desire to. I was keeping up for a while, but the last few months of my life have just not been friendly to podcast listening. So when I read this in the notes earlier today, when I was prepping, I was like, "What is Father Anthony going on about?" And then like I started to think about it. I was like, "Okay, why would he? Okay, so let me pose a series of questions.
Sure.
Let's start with curious, not judgmental. Okay. So, first of all, can you feasibly imagine Tom Bombadil creating the dwarves?
Yes.
Okay. Do you see any evidence that Bombadil is a smith, that he does any smithing or anything that's kind of related to smithing?
One word that invites it. But the whole theory would basically be that he has, in a sense, laid aside his smithing because the world is created, because he has taught his craft to so many others, and because he has seen that craft turn very bad in almost every case. Remembering that Aule the smith was the original master of Sauron and Feanor and all of the Noldor, who spend the entirety of the Silmarillion either learning to not love too much the works of their hands, or failing to learn that and seeking to dominate all of Middle-earth. But there's one line that really hit me, and it's in the Fog on the Barrow Downs, as they're effectively inviting him to come with them all the way to the Prancing Pony and have a beer with them. And he says, "Tom's got his house to mind. I have my making." In the making, you don't see him making anything unless it's poetry. And there is always that interesting question. His house is described as being under hill many, many times without ever an explanation of what that means or what the significance is. So a few things along those lines incline me towards that.
So my next question would be, what do you make of the Tom Bombadil poem?
So the Tom Bombadil poem is almost easy, because if we look at, you mean in the Adventures of Tom Bombadil?
Yeah.
Because Tolkien's preface makes very clear that poem number 1 especially reflects Hobbit lore and stories as they would have been telling them from before before Frodo ever visits Tom Bombadil. They're effectively the chosen backstory, but he almost makes explicit, we shouldn't expect all of this to be true, but these are the stories that hobbits would tell their children.
I don't think he means to say it's untrue, though, do you?
Not entirely, but I think there's one element that absolutely cannot be true as depicted, although perhaps I'm being too literal, but that would be Tom, gaining his bride by seizing her, jumping in the pool, and dragging her home to be married by force.
But isn't that kind of how he describes to the hobbits that he met her?
Well, he says that's where I met her long ago, but there's nothing about seizing her. Right, he just says, and this was a point that Subdeacon Rob Clark from Portland, really emphasized, although he disagrees with these too, because Tom Bombadil's statement, is, well, hang on, I'll pull it out, because it's a beautiful passage and kind of indicative. Let's see, where was it? Yeah, I had an errand. By that pool long ago I found the river daughter, fair young Goldberry, sitting in the rushes. Sweet was her singing then, and her heart was beating. Which is an interesting, that her heart was beating is almost evocative of the same sort of encounter that we see Thingol have with Melian.
I can see that. I think it's very hard to take that story and transpose it in any way onto Aule and Yavanna, though. I mean, just first of all, like, Yavanna's not the river woman's daughter.
No, she's not.
Like, not even sort of a little bit. She's not at all associated with aquatic things.
Well, we don't really see her associated with aquatic things in the chapters where we actually meet her either. We see her surrounded by river lilies.
You're talking about Goldberry, but she's the river woman's daughter. Mm-hmm. She sings the rain.
She sings the rain.
Like these various things. To me, it seems that Goldberry is definitely some kind of a almost like a naiad, like some kind of a river spirit. She's associated with the waters, in that sense. Like a one of the lesser spirits associated with ultimately with Ulmo.
Could be. Yet it seems to me that her grace, her dignity, her power, the elevated, status that she's granted is much more than a mere naiad.
But I don't think it's to the level of being one of the powers. I think that's basically where you lose me. I'd be quite willing to say that there's a repetition of pattern here, as Tolkien often does. If you think about Thingol and then Thranduil, who are originally the same character anyway, and then later on, Tolkien invents realizes there's a third age, and it changes everything,
Right, because he got rid of that character in the first age, and now we need a new one, so yeah.
Yes. So we have lots of repetitions of characters. Obviously, basically, there's always a kind of character that it seems like Tolkien wants in a story, someone like Melian, someone that has some characteristics that Goldberry also shares, and then ultimately it seems like Galadriel is the final perfect instantiation of that aspect of the character. So this is an interpretation from outside the story, right? But I would say I don't have any trouble at all seeing there is definitely a resolution to the masculine and feminine pattern that it seems like Aule and Yavanna struggle with, or rather men and women struggle with, and it finds its archetypical existence in the struggle between Aule and Yavanna.
But you're making my argument for me there. But
like all of those things, like I don't have trouble with any of that. I just I cannot believe that Tom and Goldberry are the powers, though. I feel like the way that the elves talk about them, I think that the scope and the things they're able to do here, the powers are archetypical. They are personal beings, but they're much more archetypical than this. This would be sort of like picking a pond and being like, oh yeah, that pond is Ulmo. It's like, well, it's downstream of Ulmo.
But Aule and Yavanna, they are depicted as uniquely concerned with Middle-earth, especially uniquely troubled by the effectively the ban on the Valar, on the powers living and dwelling among mortals, and it's explicit that
not uniquely, because Ulmo is also way more involved.
Ulmo, but and Orome would still go, but Yavanna especially, depicted as going frequently in the darkness to nurture the growing things and to care for all of these things. There's a lot of concern about those, and I would quibble as well with your, Yavanna doesn't have anything substantial to do with it, with aquatic things, but she deals with the growing things, everything that grows, which is nurtured and nourished by the waters. And, that element with the washing day that really just seems to be the rain is coming and that's the washing. That's one of the things that really makes me think Goldberry is, she's not just washing her dishes upstairs.
Right, obviously. That's why, again, like the idea that she's a river spirit of some sort. Like, obviously, even a lesser nature spirit is going to have way more majesty, especially to a hobbit.
Sure.
Than, just like your average, village lass or something like that. It's like, she's the river. When she has washing day, it means everything gets washed, like. So I don't know. It's a really hard sell to say that they're some of the powers. I don't see any evidence that would demand that in the text.
Nothing that demands it, no. But what gets me, and what I keep coming back to is, and this will maybe even be relevant as we go on, if we were ever in a story to try to depict what one of the great angels, servants of the Most High God would function like in right relationship with human beings that they were appointed to shepherd. What we know from all of human history is that human beings always move to worship that which is greater than them. And the only way to successfully tell a story in which mortals are actually living in the presence of the powers would be if the powers veiled themselves and concealed themselves behind silliness, childishness, and again.
But see, then we could argue everybody is one of the Valar. It's like my problem with that is it's simply like, okay, they don't show any of the characteristics of being the Valar, like the fundamental powers, forces of creation that hold the world together.
I would quibble with that.
Okay, again, well, just hold on.
But that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you should say they don't show these characteristics. One of which would be power and majesty, right? That even when Ulmo veils himself, like he still nearly kills Tuor.
Yeah.
Right. Like when Orome comes riding, even in a form that's appealing to the elves, they're still terrified and hide from him.
Right.
Like, there's different. Think about like even veiling themselves. It's not like you're the girl next door, right? Well, then. And so then the argument is to say, oh well, they veiled themselves out of humility. Okay, well then there's no.
It becomes unfalsifiable.
It's unfalsifiable, right?
Which is the problem.
I think another compelling bit of evidence against this idea would be the fact that Gandalf, who certainly knows what is up, treats Tom as at most a peer, and there's no sense at all. I mean, it would be a totally different conversation at the Council of Elrond if one of the 12 powers is just like right over there. Yeah. Like the arguments that he doesn't have any care for, things outside of his domain, and so he would just lose the ring, or he would just be silly with it, or things like that. That doesn't seem to be Aule's deal at all.
Yeah, but did Gandalf actually ever? What is Gandalf's level of knowledge? Because I don't think he ever speaks of having met or spoken with Tom.
Gandalf the White, he says, I am overdue to catch up with Bombadil. He's a moss gatherer, and I am a stone made for rolling. Yeah. But now it's time for us to both catch up because both of our time is coming to an end. So at most, he treats him as a peer. I think the idea that Gandalf the White would know that was Aule, I don't know. It's a hard sell. Like you're right. The argument you're making is impossible to falsify. But I would just say that's a really hard sell for me. It's a really hard sell.
Which is why ultimately at the end it's headcanon. But regardless of all of that, it is really striking on a close reading, seeing at how many points the things that Tom Bombadil and Goldberry say, they are overtly instructing and training the hobbits in the right way to interact with the powers. Thinking especially of, at a very basic level, Tom's guidance to them going through the Barrow Downs, telling them always pass to the west, never pass to the east. Just in small ways and large ways.
That, by the way, that's an old. That particular formulation actually comes up in the Irish saga I mentioned earlier.
Really?
That's an old kind of like good luck, bad luck kind of a taboo. Like there's certain things you only ever pass Widdershins, you don't pass them sunwise, or vice versa. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now I do have to say it's only the second, maybe third craziest conspiracy theory about Arda that I've ever heard. So I do expect next time I come, you have something even crazier. My favorite craziest one is the theory, and you can find like online, like people like on the old forums, you can still find people who talked about this sort of thing, that Feanor's mother, Serinde or Miriel, is actually Ungoliant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can go look that up. I'll leave that to you to go research. Next time I come on, we'll talk about it.
That one seems cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs to me.
And no, please don't be offended, but it uses very similar logic. It's like, she's a weaver. Yeah. Ungoliant's a weaver.
Fair enough. You can find coincidences everywhere. And that's
but I mean, in all seriousness, I do think that Tolkien does have certain patterns that he's always trying to figure out and work through. And one of them is like, how do you reconcile the masculine and the feminine? And it seems like that's part of what's in that old myth of Aule and Yavanna. It's also what's going on with Tom and Goldberry. It's also what's going on with Galadriel and Celeborn. Yeah. And all three of those seem to offer very different answers to the question. Right. I've always loved that Galadriel says Celeborn is the wisest of all the those now living in Middle Earth. He's the wisest, and he's like, dude has 3 lines.
Yeah,
like,
and in his 3 lines, he's corrected by his wife.
Yeah, I assume the really wise thing he did was marrying Galadriel, and that's the thing that made him the wisest.
Sure.
Yeah, that's my headcanon.
You also didn't mention the other example being Aldarion and Arendis, that goes very badly. But
yeah, I have that book right here next to me.
Yeah.
So.
At any rate, thank you for your kind engagement and also your withering refutations. I'm grateful.
All right.
Now, let's get to some of your questions and comments, dear listener. Our first is one that we actually read last month with Father Andrew, but I would feel as though I had cheated you and the world, Deacon Seraphim, if I didn't give you a chance to respond to this one as well. So would you read this note and then tell us your thoughts?
All right. So this is from Jack. He says, Dear Deacon Seraphim, I want to ask your thoughts on the topic of world building. I'm currently building a world for a D&D game that I DM for, but I'm running into trouble as I begin to think about religion and the role of gods in my world. It seems to me like there are 3 options for how gods can be understood in a fantasy setting. There are good gods that are not worshipped, as in Tolkien. There are good gods that are worshipped, as in the Forgotten Realms, for example. There are no good gods, as in real-life paganism. I would say some versions of real-life paganism, but in any case, in Tolkien's approach, you get the advantage of a philosophically sound system where the Valar are not worshipped but venerated. However, there is minimal exposure to the explicit religious practices of the elves. The approach of the Forgotten Realms is interesting because you get the interesting aspect of a direct portrayal of sacrificial worship. However, there is a major problem. Good gods, or angels/saints, do not accept worship. If they do receive worship, then they are, by definition, not good. Nevertheless, Lathander, Helm, and Torm are all understood as good deities. So my first question is, what are your thoughts on this kind of system? Is it simply bad world building? Finally, we have the possibility of portraying a realistic paganism in which none of the gods are truly good. Obviously, don't do this. However, I would find it hard to imagine this without being a dark, dank, depressing Game of Thronesy world. I'm sure it could be interesting, but I'm attracted to option 2, in part because of the combination of sacrificial worship and the possibility of goodness, truth, and beauty being present in the religious life of the people, even if it is limited. This is in contrast to a religious life, which is necessarily void of goodness, truth, and beauty. Am I missing something? Could there be some 4th option I'm not thinking of? Further, is option 3 necessarily irredeemable? Would love to hear your thoughts on this. Okay. Obviously, I have a lot of thoughts about this. Let me just share with you a couple of approaches, Jack, that I've done in my own storytelling and world building. So in my published RPG setting, which is called Emporia, Role-Playing in the World Under Starlight, it's unique in the sense that most RPGs are focused on, like you have a variety of races you can choose from, whereas in the World Under Starlight is focused solely on a single culture. And so there are subcultures, like a single race or a single culture. There are subcultures that you can choose from, but everybody is basically part of the same society. They all speak dialects of the same language. They all, with one exception, worship kind of, different in different usages or different rites or different permutations of the same religion and so on. And the reason that I did this is because the thing I'm really interested in is this question of what makes a culture as such. And the world building that we do for fantasy games and RPGs is a really fun way to explore this question. So in the World Under Starlight, there is a religion which worships the Most High God, who has, essentially angels and saints who serve him. However, that religion is not Christianity. When I say it is not Christianity, I mean it's a religion without the incarnation. And it is basically, I would say, an attempt to figure out an alternative system for how a religion would work, in the sense that this is not a religion which revolves around sacrifice, but it has another ritual act, which is at its heart instead, which is why it has a different kind of priesthood than Christianity does, etc. I didn't want to just create fantasy Christianity. I find that boring, and also I think that is much more potentially dangerous than just sort of making up your own thing. So you can, read those books, take a look at that, let me know how you think I did. But that is one approach that you can take, would be to, if you want to do something that's kind of more reminiscent of the real world Middle Ages, then I think you have a couple of options. So first, I would remind you that originally, the very first D&D setting, or close to it, was Gary Gygax's Castle Greyhawk. And in Greyhawk, the patron of lawful clerics is St. Cuthbert. So if you're going out and you're smiting orcs in the name of law, St. Cuthbert is your patron. And I just got back from St. Cuthbert's tomb a few weeks ago, and so I just find that super lovely and very amusing. You can just make saints. So what I've done in my D&D setting, which I'm currently running Axe Imperial Imprint with, is to say, there's the sort of old religion, which was a polytheistic religion, and it still survives in some corners of the kingdom. And then the new religion that came along and supplanted it, something kind of like Christianity, which is the worship of Suva the One. And then he also has a number of saints that kind of cover different patronages. And you can just say they're saints. Like, you can just do that. Like, that might solve a lot of your problems. Now, I think the idea of having, like, trying to do realistic paganism is not something any Christian should be attempting in their RPG. I might run myself, because maybe I could try to do it in a Christian way, but I would never play in another person's Call of Cthulhu game, for instance, because it's a setting that's inherently dark and nihilistic, destructive. There's a deep belief that there is no hope, that there, and that kind of, deep cosmic pessimism, I think, is really, really poisoning to the soul, which is why I think Game of Thrones is, actually a bad story. Like, it's, not just badly written. Obviously, some people have found it really well written, but an actual bad story that most people probably shouldn't read, because it is probably actually bad for you. Anyway, so I really think that as Christians, we just have no business going in that direction. At the end of the day, Christ is the God, as Tolkien says, of men and elves, and he has to be God in our stories. And that does not mean that he, should appear by name. Don't try to do your own fantasy Aslan. You won't do it as well as Lewis did. Like, Lewis barely got away with it. You probably can't get away with it. But, keep in mind, at the end of the day, you'll have to be accountable to God for the stories that you tell. And so, so go about it carefully. Probably the easiest thing to do is just, set it in an analog of medieval Europe and just have a saints. Like, it's not hard. Yeah. So.
Beautiful. I thought you might bring some clarity to that question. I'm not adding anything else to that.
Okay.
Wonderful. Jack, I hope you're still with us, but there is your definitive answer over 2 episodes from both Father Andrew and from now Deacon Seraphim. All right. Then we have another email, and this one brings us back to my second question for you, and if we're not careful, could derail the whole episode, although I don't think so. So, longtime listener Cade wrote the following in early October. He said, Dear Father Anthony, I was glad to hear my comparison with Ungoliant and Bombadil have a good reception. I don't think I've come across the idea anywhere else, so I'm glad it didn't seem too far out. Kate had basically said maybe, Bombadil is just an enigmatic additional, figure like Ungoliant, which is a fair thought.
I think that's the easiest answer to the question, for sure.
And he says, I'll just say I would like to hear an episode of you.
He's Feanor's uncle.
I'd like to hear an episode of you and Deacon Seraphim discussing the Valar at some point, because I feel like his episodes on the Silmarillion that he did, and perhaps the Silmarillion itself, seems to give a less exalted view of them than you do. That's interesting. Suffice to say, this would be my main starting place for any discussion on the idea of Aule and Yavanna as Tom and Goldberry. Nevertheless, the discussion was fascinating as always, especially the wider in-world historical context of the events surrounding the Barrow Wights and what even they are. So as I read this, I'm not quite sure what he means by me having presumably a more exalted view of the Valar than you do, Deacon Seraphim.
I sort of wonder what he was listening to, because I think that my sense of the majesty of the Valar is one of the things that makes me reject the Aule and Yavanna theory. I always think of Ulmo coming to Turgon to Tuar at Neverest, but I think that probably what he's referring to is some of the episodes we refer to where it seems like the Valar seem to make mistakes.
Sure.
And basically the question that I'm always trying to raise, and this is mostly to be a little provocative, because what I want people to do is, like ask a hard question, think, and try to answer it about the text. But the question of, was it right for the Valar to do this? Was it right for them to summon the elves to begin with? Was it right for them to ban the elves from, ban the Noldor from going? Like, was it right for them to act in these various ways? Were they, it seems like they're too hospitable to the elves on the one hand, and then too hard-hearted towards the elves later. And one of the things that I would always want to hint at is, of course, the Silmarillion is a story not from the perspective of the Valar, but from the perspective of the Noldor, mainly. Yeah. And this is how it seemed to them, right? But obviously the ways of the powers are ultimately going to be very inscrutable to the children of Eru. And if them, like, how much more God, So I say all this to say that might be kind of what he has in mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I think your reflections on that, combined with my own reading, again, of Silmarillion material, and just watching the theme of control and domination play out, that really is one of the things that, so in a general sense that I think you and I can agree with, the Valar seem to be depicted as growing in wisdom over the course of the history of Middle Earth. And if they make mistakes, they're the mistakes of youth and immaturity. Although youth and immaturity for the powers are.
What does it even mean?
What does that even mean? We can see that depicted perhaps most just in the bird's eye view that we get in the Ainulindale, and we see them growing and learning and changing there. But not to return again but to return to my thing. That's kind of why it's appealing, because the Valar at the beginning of the Silmarillion, they only function as powers, and their opposition to Morgoth is only in, going head to head with him, power against power. And in the course of all of that, the first iteration of Arda is effectively destroyed, and they the pillars are thrown down, and everything has to be renewed and restored, and they're effectively over time just withdrawing more and more, because if they actually function as the powers, then they're going to destroy everyone else.
Smaller,
right?
Yeah.
That's
the real reason they wait so long to deal with Morgoth at the end of the second.
So we see them learning instead to interact in support, in very mild and careful ways, with the sending of the Istari, the wizards, with the messages and the small guidance that we see presumably from Ulmo with Frodo's dreams and Faramir and Boromir's dream, and all of these things that kind of are advancing the plot. Where also we see the hand of Ilúvatar even beyond that, bringing the ring into the hand of Bilbo in the darkness of the cave when Gollum has just lost it. If I'm parsing what I think Gandalf is saying there correctly. So I think there's, on the one hand, the grandeur of the Valar, and there's the reality that they've learned both from their own failures and then from the mistakes of the elves and eventually the men, that the path to the restoration, the healing of Arda, is not through power, but rather through humility, rather through, frankly, a path of suffering. There's the intuiting of the incarnation that comes in the conversation of Finrod and Andreth, that surely the Valar would now be aware of and conscious of. There's a different path, and the idea that the Valar could take that up, even to the point of living in the midst of mortals, is appealing to me. That's not an argument, a definitive argument that Tolkien intended it that way, or even wrote it in after the fact. But it is a striking point. The Valar begin as absolutely the powers. But what is the end of their story? At the end of their story, at the end of the music, they're effectively silent. And just watching the music of Ilúvatar sung in and through the children of Ilúvatar play out until that great and glorious final chord as his hands are spread wide. And, I know what I think is...
Until Aule breaks open the Silmarils and rekindles the trees and all those things.
Sure. At any rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the kenosis that you're looking for, right, is Gandalf. Like that is his function in the story.
Yeah.
And I think that he's the one that really exemplifies that. I don't know. I think there's something else going on with Bombadil. I certainly don't think Tolkien intended that. Yeah. It's a fun headcanon theory. Like, obviously, as headcanon, ultimately there's no argument against it.
And that's the problem. It's headcanon, and it needs. It could be refuted, but the refutations. It's fairly refutation safe, which makes it not a good.
Well, it's
argument.
It's a little circular. I mean, the thing is, muster the evidence, write the paper, let's peer review it.
Have some fun.
All the things, in
all my copious free time. Here's a question I did want to ask that is, I think, somewhat, tangentially relevant to Cade's question. Tolkien's statement in I forget which letter, that The Lord of the Rings is fundamentally a Christian and Catholic work, unconsciously in the writing, but consciously in the revision. What do you think he's talking about with that?
My friend Tom Hillman, who has been on the podcast a few times, wrote a wonderful book about this called To Rule the Fate of Many, which is about power and pity in the... Anyway, it's a wonderful book, and he I think gives the best pitch for this that I've ever heard. It's been a couple of years since I read his book, so I would struggle to summarize the entire thing. But when you talk about it being fundamentally, Christian, I believe Tolkien chooses all of his words carefully. I believe he very, very rarely throws adverbs around the way that I do, which is essentially willy-nilly, just, it was really, really good, or it was fundamentally flawed, like your argument about Yavanna and Aule, or whatever. But when Tolkien says the word fundamentally, he really is thinking of the fundament, and that is all the way down at the roots, right? All the way down. The idea is bedrock. The bedrock of it is Christian and Catholic. And I think that's what he means. And so it's easy to contrast it to Narnia because they're roughly contemporary and, those guys knew each other and all those things. It's not doing the same thing that Narnia is doing, but it is still deeply, deeply Christian all the way down at its roots. And the problem is that people who miss that are the kind of people, both Christians who are maybe of a more fundamentalist persuasion, ironically, because for them fundamentalist means something else, right? And I honestly, having come from a fundamentalist family, I hate people throwing it around as pejorative. I really actually do. Mostly because I think most people would probably still call me a fundamentalist.
There's a deep fidelity at the core of fundamentalism.
Exactly,
and fidelity is a good thing. Even
it's
if,
a good thing,
even
as long
if
as it's
misplaced.
the right thing and in the right measure. Yeah, but it's a good quality. That quality to say, there's this thing, and I'm
in submission to this.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. So fundamentalists who reject fantasy literature, although they're getting fewer and fewer between, are one of the reasons that they reject it is because they are also the kind of people who would tend to reject allegorical readings. And they would tend to reject the idea of symbolic meaning because they are suspicious of anything that might be implying, and I certainly don't believe this, but of anything that might be implying that if you say there's an allegorical or a symbolic reading, then you're saying this thing did not happen.
Yes.
And the thing that's really, really important to them is whether or not it happened. And justly so, because there were a lot of liberal theologians who came along last century and said, you don't actually have to believe in the resurrection. You can just believe in, the idea of the resurrection.
Right.
You don't have to actually believe in the resurrection, right? And so, obviously, for me, that's all a huge problem. But what I would say then is that for people who are only interested in a surface reading, which would include those fundamentalists, but it would also include neo-pagans, people who want to read Tolkien's work and insist that it was not at all a Christian work.
Cherry pick their own things. Yeah,
I don't know how these people exist, but I get tagged in some inane discussion like once a day on X.
Ugh.
So I know people are still beating this horse, but it's the same kind of thing. They're not willing to read down past the stuff on the surface. So on the surface, what do you have? Elves, wizards, dwarves, right? Well, those are all things that are in Norse paganism, for instance.
Yeah, and gods in the background,
Assume were in Norse paganism because, of course, most Norse paganism was documented by Christians.
Right.
But anyway, let's assume, those are all features of Norse paganism. So to say, see, look, it's a pagan thing. Well, sure, but scrape back the soil down to the bedrock, and what do you find? Well, you find elves and humans being different ways of talking about the incarnation. You find the whole existence of dwarves being different ways of talking about the act of subcreation and the sort of the problems with free will and determinism. When you look at wizards, what you actually find is how to explain what it's like when an angel or a saint is operating in the world, like those different things, right? So to me, that's, among other things, that's what it means. But it also means that the virtues, the defining virtue of the Lord of the Rings, I would say, is a kind of Boethian charity. And this is what it's the thing that ultimately the great triumph of virtue in the Lord of the Rings, which is rarely ever talked about, because maybe we'll read this. I was going to read something else, but maybe I'll read this instead, is what happens at the end between Saruman and Frodo. And it's rarely ever talked about because it's not in the movies. And so people forget it's there, even when they read the books all the time. The movies cast a certain spell. But this scene is really important because what happens is Frodo, who was this very, humble thing, but has become one of the great ones of Middle-earth, right, is encountering probably the second greatest, most powerful being that in Middle-earth in his age, who has now become this lowly, vile, despicable, but ultimately pitiable creature. And Frodo is able to extend a love to Saruman that is a real caritas, a real charity, which is completely unreasonable. But it's not like a touchy-feely, like Hallmark movie moment. It is because Frodo has come to understand what charity really is. He's come to understand what pity really is. And so he's able to make this choice. And then, of course, Saruman rejects that gift of charity and ends up experiencing, death. But it's a really powerful moment, and it's, to me, that's the deep moral ethic that's at the heart of the Lord of the Rings. I don't want to get political or anything, but in as much as Lord of the Rings is very often really well loved by people on the right, this is one of the things I hope people are taking away from it. Let me just put it that way. Like ultimately, love of enemies, that's the test. That's the test of your faith. You only love Christ as much as you love your worst enemy.
And if you want someone to make it more explicit than that, then Tolkien will do that for us himself by talking all about how dangerous it is to try to turn the weapon of the enemy against him. That's right.
So anyway, I just say all that to say, I think that when you scrape back the topsoil of the hobbits and the bacon and the eggs and the elves and the dwarves and the kind of like the Nordic set pieces and all these things, what you find is a deeply Christian ethic. Like there's nothing like that kind of love of enemies in Norse paganism, not even remotely. You find a deeply Christian ethic. You also find a deeply Christian metaphysic.
I like that answer. Thank you. All right. You're a popular person, so we actually have 3 listener requests that all are related to you in some way.
This is crazy. It's like a mailbag episode.
And this last one from Father David Kinghorn, who serves, actually, St. Cuthbert Orthodox Church, so that's fun. If you would, Deacon Seraphim, read this one, and then you can respond directly.
Dear Father Andrew and Richard, now it's Father Anthony and Deacon Seraphim. Haha. That's how long it took us to actually answer this letter. Your latest episode discussing Turin, boy, that was a long time ago, prompted me to write you about a couple of questions that have been in the back of my mind for a while. As a practicing Catholic, it's interesting that Tolkien flips sacred geography, and now the West is the direction of blessedness, and the East brings evil and chaos. That's actually the weirdest thing Tolkien does, I think. More importantly, in the fates of Turin, Nienor, and Hurin, he demonstrates an, if not sympathetic attitude, at least not a condemnatory one. Is he perhaps purposely using a Nordic attitude of the sagas that were his inspiration? Also, Richard, some time ago, you had announced that you would be starting a podcast about the Anglo-Saxon Church. I was really looking forward to it, but it never happened. What happened? I wish you both a blessed Pascha. And if we just save this a few more months, like 2 more months.
I was going to say, I thought that this was a project that had died, but what you're talking about with your hagiographies, that sounds like the fruition of this project.
So the project that I'm talking about with hagiography is the Great Rood Screen, which is the name of the podcast. It is that project, and essentially the project really morphed. I wrote scripts for the first 3 episodes. I recorded the first episode, and then I said, nope, I'm not ready for this to go out yet. And I didn't know why, but it just wasn't the right time.
It didn't sing.
And now I know why. And so now I know the things that were missing. And that was the saints that were involved who really hadn't introduced themselves to me in a deep way at that point. But that's changed. So that is one of the 2 big projects that I'll be doing for Ancient Faith next year. So sorry about that, Father David, but just wait a little bit longer, I implore you, and I promise a very nice episode for St. Cuthbert's Feast Day in 2026. All right, good question. His other question is about the flip of sacred geography and the sort of the old Germanic heroism or the old pre-Christian heroism of the ancient North. So those 2 things go together. Let me explain what's going on there. For us as Christians, the East is the sort of the sacred direction, or at least it's the direction from which, the light comes. Christ is the Orient, right? Well, this is because Jerusalem is in the East. And this is because this is, that's the historical path that Christianity took to get to us here in the Western Hemisphere. For our pre-Christian ancestors, the only thing that comes out of the East, because for them, Christianity doesn't come from the East, it came from the South. Like it came from the South up, basically from Southern Europe to Northern Europe. For them, the only thing that came out of the East was the Huns. Was wave after wave after wave of incredibly bellicose, very proficient
horse archers,
nomads, people who are incredibly, incredibly good at destroying everything that you had, burning it to the ground, taking away your women and children as slaves, and then coming back again next year to do the same thing. So the very earliest Germanic poem, which survives to us today, and which Christopher Tolkien was an expert in, it's found in the Havrar Saga, which is the saga I did my thesis on as well, is called The Battle of the Goths and the Huns. And it is basically a survival of an ancient ancestral trauma. And this is an ancient ancestral trauma which Tolkien felt keenly, and which every single person who's ever read Tolkien has now been infected with, which is this ancestral trauma of like the barbarian hordes coming out of the East. And what do we have here? Well, all we have is our backs to the sea. And so for people living in Ireland, for people living off the coast of Scandinavia and northwestern Europe, there's no hope to the East. Now, there is a Gondor, in the form of Constantinople or Rome. Like there's an emperor somewhere over there, and he's got a big city, but he's got plenty of his own problems because he's also dealing with those same Eastern hordes, as it turns out. So there is that guy. But what's over the sea? What's to the west? Well, some people thought maybe it's paradise. Some people thought maybe if it's not paradise, maybe there's a land over there that is, that's somewhere beautiful, somewhere safe, somewhere full of grapevines. We could call it Vinland. There's somewhere full of green, pleasant places. We'll call it Greenland. This is kind of their imagination. Their imagination is that, out of the East, the Huns come. It's Atli, which is a Gothic name. Attila's name is Gothic. He was named probably by his slaves, by his captives.
And it means like little father, right?
Yeah, little father. Yeah, it's probably Goth mercenaries or slaves who are in the service who call him that. So from the
Big Daddy.
Yeah, but he is the main villain in the versions of the Volsunga Saga and all these different things. Like the generational trauma that finds its way into all the mythopoeic storytelling of the Old North is the invasion of the Huns. So that being said, they don't look to hope from the East. What they look to from the East is, trouble. And to the West, well, they've got their back to the sea. and the sea is cold and unforgiving and all these other things. But also sometimes deliverance comes out of the sea. Why? Because sometimes the Frankish king's fleet shows up, to save you. Sometimes you can sail away to somewhere better, to somewhere safer. You can find the Isle of the Blessed, those kinds of things. So it feels like an inversion to us, but it really just has to do with Tolkien taking that ancient ancestral trauma that we all share as Northwestern Europeans and mythologizing it, essentially.
I know I've read that at least at the time Tolkien was a young man, and for his generation in the First World War, that sense of going into the West was just a euphemism for death. First of all, do I remember correctly? How does that interact with that generational memory, or are they separate things?
I'm not sure about that, but I mean, just remember, what did everybody call the Germans?
Well, they called them the Huns.
The First World War. They call them the Huns.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason for that. Like, there's a reason they're the Hun. Obviously, it's like fundamentally, it's silly in terms of like real world history to call them that, because it was the ancestors of the modern day Germans who were fighting the Huns, back in the day.
Yeah.
But the point is, everything's relative. Like, so France is west of Germany. England is west of Germany, right? And so you suddenly have these, massed goose stepping, barbarians showing up with their outlandish spiked helmets and all these different things, and and it seems very barbaric. And of course, obviously, one of the things that you want to do if you're trying to launch a successful propaganda campaign is to villainize the people that you are fighting, to dehumanize them as much as possible. Lots of examples of this, in both world wars and in every war. But the way that it was done in Tolkien society was, to refer to the Germans as the Hun. Why? Because that's what people went back to. Like, it's not that long since people saw were going to see Wagner in a theater, like, on a regular basis. Like, that was a part of their entertainment, part of their education, was knowing those stories, and especially through Wagner. And so the idea is, these are really evil, barbaric people who, if they get a hold of you, they're going to torture you. They're going to destroy your civilization. Yeah. They're going to destroy everything that you have.
It's the end of the world.
Right. It's the end of the world. Right. Yeah. So that's the idea. That's the idea. That's kind of what's going on there. And that's what Tolkien tries to encapsulate. Remember that Tolkien's initial idea, which he never fully abandons, is that the story of Arda is the prehistory of Northwestern Europe, and that Middle Earth is our Middle Earth. Yeah. And so that's still the Northwest coast. Yeah. That's what's important. So.
And yet also everything he writes is deeply laden with, his own trauma, his own loss, and his own experience. It's all laden with the burden and the struggle with evil and death. And I don't know. I'm sure that your answer is the better one. If I were trying, it just crossed my mind. It's because it is sort of thematic. Everything in Tolkien is about embracing death in the right way.
Well, that's what he says.
But it certainly makes sense to make death as loss, death as everything falling apart, death as again as laying aside that burden of power, and embracing humility, such that it is the least of the free peoples through whom deliverance comes. And even then, they go into the West to die, to lay aside their burden, because theirs is not the actual healing of Arda. It's just to keep the soil fertile for the next generation.
If The Lord of the Rings is a liturgical service, it is, of course, Vespers.
I like it. All right. That's all we've got for questions and comments today. We're only an hour and 20 minutes in, so we're running right on schedule. Feel free to send more to us at Amon Sûl at ancientfaith.com. You can also message us on the Facebook page or put a comment on the YouTube channel. And
please send in your comments for unlikely couple pairings that might actually be Tom Bombadil and
yes, get me out of my rut via a reductio ad absurdum.
Artists went back in time.
Also, please remember, we are always looking for new photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop and the Weather Hills approaching it, so we can feature them on YouTube during the podcast opening there. I think the one for this episode is actually going to be one that I submitted, but we'll see what the producers end up picking. Regardless, if you live or work or commute under the shadow of Amon Sûl, please share a photo with us. So, this brings us back to the main portion of our episode today. We have brought Deacon Seraphim back to the podcast to discuss one of the pivotal chapters of The Lord of the Rings, Strider. As always, we'll provide an outline of the chapter at the beginning, but we urge you all to pause and go back and read the chapter yourselves before we proceed. So, are you back? Excellent. Here's the outline. Everything basically happens in the one room. So part 1 of 5, as always, Strider is there. He wants to talk, and he has a price. He wants to be taken along. He heard Frodo talk about his name, no Baggins, only Underhill, and he's looking for Frodo Baggins and is concerned about the secret Frodo's carrying. He promises to take good care of the secret, better care than they have, and care is needed. Black horsemen have been through Bree. Frodo is concerned, but he thinks all is well. The horsemen have missed him. Strider says no, they and others will return. He knows these riders, he knows their number, and Bill Ferny and others will send messages to them. He offers to guide them to Rivendell himself. Sam says no, but Frodo thinks Strider can be trusted. He's not sure, but Strider's about to tell his own story when, part 2, Butterbur arrives. He brings candles, but says he also was looking for a Shire hobbit named Baggins. Gandalf told him to watch for him. He has a letter from Gandalf. He also has had a run-in with the Black Riders a couple days before. They were looking for Baggins, too. Frodo's a popular guy. Butterbur told the riders to leave, but he warns they were asking about him all through the Bree land, and he warns them that Strider was asking about Baggins too. Strider then steps out of the shadows. Frodo vouches for him, and Strider warns Butterbur the riders come from Mordor. Butterbur asks what's to be done. Strider tells him, help Frodo, and then forget he ever knew him. Butterbur agrees to call them early, goes to bolt the door, but Merry's not there. He's outside walking. Butterbur goes to find him. Part 3, Frodo reads Gandalf's letter. It was supposed to be sent months before July, in fact, and warned Frodo to leave the Shire before August at the very latest. He tells Frodo to look for Strider, warns against false Striders, and tells him Strider's name is Aragorn. He provides a poem which talks about a broken sword, and then he worries in many postscripts that Butterbur will forget to send the letter. They continue to talk about whether Strider is true and trustworthy. Sam remains skeptical, but Strider says if he were false, Sam would already be dead, and he would already have the ring for himself. But he isn't false. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death he can save them, he will. He then quotes the poem without seeing the letter, and he shows them his broken sword. Part 4, plans are laid. They're heading for Rivendell, and they plan to leave the road and go cross-country as soon as they get out of Bree. Their first goal is Weathertop. Gandalf will make for Weathertop if he follows them. Then they worry about Gandalf. Strider hasn't received any messages from him either. He only heard Gandalf was missing, and Frodo was on the road. He heard this from Gildor's people, so he's been watching anxiously. And then finally, part 5, Merry returns. He's seen Black Riders in the village. He followed them, and then he fainted. Nob found him outside near Bill Ferny's house. He said, I thought I had fallen into deep water, which is the same thing Tom Bombadil said after they encountered the Barrow Wight, which is interesting. Then they decide not to sleep in their rooms. They bring their luggage instead to the parlor, and they leave the rooms vacant so they won't be where the riders expect. And they leave pillows under their blankets to look like them, like teenagers sneaking out at night. They update Merry on what he missed, and they fortify the room. Strider stays with them to guard, and they all fall asleep. So, besides the outline, we should note a couple things from the history of Middle-earth. Originally, this chapter was written in direct continuity with the previous chapter, The Prancing Pony, and it was only separated at a later date. There were a great many revisions between that first composition and publication, but none of them obscure that the action continues effectively without interruption. Second, this chapter in particular contains two critical elements around which the entirety of the plot up to this point and the plot from this point on turn. The first of these is the question of the letter. Who has a letter from Gandalf, when that letter comes to light, and what the letter contains. Answering that question for Tolkien and making everything in the story work without contradiction required that he go back and very carefully attend to the timeline all the way back in the spring, in the shadow of the past chapter, up to this point in Bree, and really beyond. So in some versions, the ranger is the one that produces the letter himself. In the others, the innkeeper produces the letter, and in at least one version, both of them have a letter from Gandalf. So for Tolkien, figuring out what made the most sense with the action of the story and mapping out what happened in the background to ensure that there were no holes in the story, it took him a lot of time and effort and thought. Ultimately, what he settled on really bore a remarkable resemblance to the story as first drafted in 1937 or maybe 38. So that's the first question, the letter and everything. The second turning point that arises in this chapter is the question of who this strange ranger is. For at least he was identified as a ranger from the beginning. The problem is, originally ranger was the term applied to hobbits who lived outside the Shire, and this figure was actually a hobbit named Trotter, and he wore wooden shoes.
I have a lot to say about this Trotter character.
I thought you might. Before I keep going with all this, do you want to add anything about that first point, or shall I continue with my summary? And then...
Can I give a very brief history of Trotter, the greatest character that we're glad is not actually in the final version of the story?
Please do. And then I'll add in anything you missed from my notes.
So Trotter is one of these characters who shows up for Tolkien totally unprovoked. And when I say totally unprovoked, I mean Tolkien was going on his merry way, writing a story, and suddenly a character inserted itself into the story. Galadriel is another one of these characters, I think. And it's very clear if you look at the draft history that Tolkien had no idea of Galadriel by the time until he got to Lothlorien. And then suddenly it was like, oh, who's this character? You know, and she just takes over, right?
And she takes over his life in a real sense.
Takes over his life. And then by extension takes over my life. Especially my young life. Yeah. So Trotter appears the first time as this a very perplexing character about whom the only thing that is consistent throughout all of the drafts is essentially the use of Trotter as pseudonym.
Yeah.
It is only after Tolkien actually finishes The Lord of the Rings in 1948 that he goes back and changes it to Strider, which is really lucky because, I'm sorry, Strider's way cooler than Trotter as a name.
Yes, and Trotter, Strider has the great advantage of not having a euphemistic reference to the runs present.
Exactly. Yep. No, that's always say the word out loud. This is just good GMing advice, by the way. When you make up a fantasy name in your head, like say it out loud.
Yep.
Okay, so
I think that's why Celeborn ultimately starts with a C and not a T.
That is, thank you. Yes, that is what I was trying to allude to. So you guys can go look that up online if you're curious.
Yeah.
So Trotter is described for the first time we meet him as a queer-looking, brown-faced hobbit. He had an enormous mug in front of him and was smoking a broken stem pipe right under his rather long nose. He was dressed in dark, rough brown cloth and had a hood on in spite of the warmth. And very remarkably, because of course, remember, hobbits don't wear shoes, he had wooden shoes. The innkeeper, Barliman Butterbur, also refers to him as a ranger, which at the time means nothing more than one of the wild folk who speaks little, but he can tell these fascinating stories. So, frequent visitor at Bree, nobody knows his real name.
Yep.
So, at this time, he's just a very outlandish hobbit, but otherwise his role in the early drafts of the story, especially the stuff concerning Bree, is essentially the same as you just said, all the way up to the final text of Lord of the Rings. And, of course, he manages to convince Bingo, which is the name given to Frodo at this stage of the story. Also, bullet dodged. I don't know what to say. He manages to convince Bingo that he is a friend of Gandalf, and he leads the hobbits on the perilous journey from Bree to Rivendell. Now, as Tolkien is writing this, he keeps writing in the margins, almost like a crazy person. Who is Trotter? Who is Trotter?
And sometimes suggestions, is he a man?
Right.
Is he an elf? Maybe he's one of the elves that Elrond sent out.
I want to get to the elf thing in a minute, because the elf thing is the wildest, like, almost happened thing. So when he reaches the arrival at Rivendell, Tolkien gets to a point where he's not happy with the story. He goes back, does the alterations that you just mentioned. He didn't actually alter the manuscript itself. He did a separate series of notes that are called queries and alterations. Yeah. And one of his suggestions is that rangers should not be hobbits as originally planned, which would mean that Trotter's not a hobbit. Well, what is he? He says, well, maybe if he's a hobbit, maybe he's a hobbit who associated himself with the rangers. And in fact, maybe he's Bilbo. But then Tolkien's like, nah, he's not Bilbo. Bilbo already had his story. So the reason he's not the main character is that, of course, Bilbo's story ends with the line, he lived happily ever after to the end of his days. So on this basis, Bilbo can't be involved in the adventure. This is what his thinking. So then he comes with this idea that
Hang on. As an aside, I feel like at this moment, there's a missed opportunity, because there's a possibility for a very brief moment where there might be a whole nother group of hobbits, because the idea of the Men of the West being the Rangers is developing here. But there's a possibility for some hobbits to actually be still living as effectively ongoing, continuing citizens of a surviving Arnor, to effectively be part of the Rangers. But that's dispensed with.
So then he says, well, maybe he's some guy named Fosco Took, later changed to Fosco Boffin. This idea that's relative of Bilbo's who had vanished from the Shire a long time ago. This doesn't solve any problems, though. It just makes more questions. And then Tolkien writes in a new series of notes called New Uncertainties and Projections, which is what the notes are called. He writes, he says, Trotter, I know, right? Isn't it great? Yeah. He writes, Trotter turns out to be Peregrine, who had been to Mordor. Again, this doesn't solve any problems. It just makes things more complicated. So now we have Peregrine Boffin.
Would this be an appropriate point to actually read the introduction that he writes around this character, Peregrine?
Please. All right. Yeah, that's a great idea.
So this, I believe, is this is the rewritten version of a long-expected party that comes in effectively at this point. Tolkien drafted it, I believe, sometime 1938, maybe 39. And if you would, Deacon Seraphim, just read it in full.
At 99, they began to call him well-preserved, though unchanged would have been nearer the mark. Some were heard to say that it was too much of a good thing, this combination of apparently perpetual youth with seemingly inexhaustible wealth. It will have to be paid for, they said. It isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. But trouble had not yet come, and Mr. Baggins was extremely generous with his money. So most people, and especially the poor and less important hobbits, pardoned his oddities. In a way, the inhabitants of Hobbiton were secretly rather proud of him. The wealth that he had brought back from his travels became a local legend, and it was widely believed, whatever the old folk might say, that most of the hill was full of tunnels stuffed with treasure. He may be peculiar, but he does no harm, said the younger folk. But not all of his more important relatives agreed. They were suspicious of his influence on their children, and especially of their sons meeting Gandalf at his house. Their suspicions were much increased by the unfortunate affair of Peregrine Boffin. Peregrine was the grandson of Bilbo's mother's second sister, Donamira Took. He was a mere babe, 5 years old, when Bilbo came back from his journey, but he grew up a dark-haired and, for a hobbit, a lanky lad, very much more of a Took than a Boffin. He was always trotting round to Hobbiton, for there it is, he's trotting. His father, Paladin Boffin, lived at Northrop, only a mile or two beyond the hill. When Peregrine began to talk about mountains and dwarves and forest and wolves, Paladin became alarmed and finally forbade his son to go near Bag End and shut his door on Bilbo. Bilbo took this to heart, for he was extremely fond of Peregrine, but he did nothing to encourage him to visit Bag End secretly. Peregrine then ran away from home and was found wandering about half-starved up on the moors of Northfarthing. Finally, the day after he came of age, in the spring of Bilbo's 80th year, he disappeared and was never found in spite of a search all over the Shire. In former times, Gandalf had always been held responsible for the occasional regrettable incidents of this kind, but now Bilbo got a large share of the blame, and after Peregrine's disappearance, most of his younger relations were kept away from him, though in fact Bilbo was probably more troubled by the loss of Peregrine than all the Boffins put together. He had, however, other young friends, who for one reason or another were not kept away from him. His favorite soon became Frodo Baggins, the grandson of Mirabella, the third of the old Duke's remarkable daughters, and son of Drogo, one of Bilbo's second cousins. Just about the time of Peregrine's disappearance, Frodo was left an orphan, when only a child of 12, and so he had no ancient parents to keep him out of bad company. He lived with his uncle, Rory Brandybuck, and his mother's 101 relatives in the great hole of Buckleberry, Brandy Hall.
So, I mean, at this point, we've got Frodo, not Bingo any longer, so that change has occurred. So I think this must be late enough anyway. But we've got a backstory now for Trotter. This Peregrine has a great many adventures that I don't think Tolkien ever even really outlines, except that he eventually, for some reason, undergoes torture in Mordor and either has his feet badly injured or maybe even amputated, hence the wearing of wooden shoes and maybe having wooden feet.
Yes.
So in this conception, Bingo/Frodo thinks he recognizes Trotter, but can't quite place him until they arrive at Rivendell when the two nephews are reunited with Bilbo and everything falls into place.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll read that alternative reunion when we get to it, but for the moment, I think this lets us understand something of what Tolkien is thinking with this Trotter character when he first appears as a hobbit, but I think you might have more for us than that summary, Deacon Seraphim.
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much nails it. The idea is that basically the Hobbits' names are getting switched around so much in these early drafts, it's a little hard to keep up with all of it. But
when we covered it fairly thoroughly with Father Andrew last time, but
the idea is that Trotter is supposed to have become some kind of a great traveler, and so he goes on the hunt for Gollum with Gandalf, and those are the circumstances in which he is captured by Sauron or his minions and tortured. So that's the context in which he went to Mordor, is when they were hunting for Gandalf, and some of that
for Gollum, right?
Yeah, for Gollum, sorry. Yeah, so some of that survives, in the story of the hunt for Gollum that Gandalf will later relate. Obviously, Aragorn does not get captured because he's
Aragorn.
He's better. He's Aragorn. Frankly, I mean, he's too good for that. But he doesn't get captured because he is the greatest traveler of the age. Yeah. But still, this idea that Gandalf needed some outside help, and there was kind of a specialist, and that specialist is associated with this Trotter character. All of that is still pretty early on. Now, at this point, Tolkien stops working on The Lord of the Rings for about a year. And when he starts again, he goes back in, Christopher Tolkien calls this the fourth stage of the writing, and he goes back in making tons of changes all over again. And one of the notes that he makes at this point is to say, maybe Trotter's a disguised elf. And then never comes back to that idea.
Yeah. So he's still not sure. I'm not misremembering, though, that throughout all of this, it's not just who is Trotter, but maybe Trotter should be a man. Maybe he should be a man of the West. Maybe he should be this. Maybe not. So it seems like even as he's writing Trotter the Hobbit all the way through to Balin's tomb in Moria, there's an ambiguity there. He's a hobbit throughout, but
he keeps kicking this around. So about the same time as the Elvish suggestion, he writes another suggestion, which is he gives Trotter the name Aragorn. And he says he is a man of Elrond's race, because there's no Dunedain yet. Like, that's not part of the conception yet. So
not at least in Lord of the Rings. They haven't come in yet. He's written The Fall of Numenor. He's written The Last Road.
Yes.
But it hasn't been developed to this point where it's actually connecting in.
It is also not totally clear at what point Tolkien decides to connect the Third Age to his older stuff. And when I say not totally clear, I know Tolkien scholars who think the moment that he decides Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are connected to the Silmarillion and not just cannibalizing names from the Silmarillion, is when Trotter at the time starts to sing the Lay of Lathian. And that's when he suddenly is like, wait a minute, I can make all of this connect. And then that's when Numenor becomes very important, because Numenor is the connective tissue between those two things.
That makes sense.
But at this point, there's no Dunedain in the sense that they exist in The Lord of the Rings, like the last remnant of the old Northern Kingdom. This is just, Aragorn is a man of Elrond's race, with Elrond, of course, not being an elf, but rather one of the Paravel, a half-elf. and even described as such in The Hobbit, which had obviously been published by then. So the story of Numenor and the descendants of Elros is not fully developed at this point. In fact, one of the things that Tolkien interrupts the Lord of the Rings to do is to go back to the Numenor story. But in any case, you can see all these germs of the character percolating. Well, I just mixed two metaphors. But what's really fun, and you will get a kick out of this, I think, is that, he kind of sketches this out, but goes back to writing and leaves Trotter as Peregrine Boffin, all this stuff. And then, in the subsequent drafts concerning Bree during the fourth stage, he keeps his physical description exactly the same, except that now he's a man.
Yep.
And the wooden shoes he leaves out, which is very fortunate. I think it would be very hard to take the character of Aragorn seriously if he's wearing a set of Dutch clogs. Gandalf's letter that Frodo receives from Butterbur has a bunch of changes that are made to it.
Yeah.
And one of those is that in the first draft of the letter, the character of Trotter is called Aragorn, son of Celeborn, of the line of Isildur. And of course, Celeborn is not Celeborn at this point. He's the other name.
Yeah.
So this is the very first time that the connection to Isildur is mentioned. Isildur and his association with the ring already exist at this point. But the history of it and the position and how it affects the story, none of that's been actually explained in the story yet. And so, the other big development that comes in this letter, naming him as Aragorn, is the very first draft of the "All that is gold does not glitter" rhyme. And that's the really important thing. And it gets a few versions. So the very first version is just "All that is gold does not glitter, not all that is long. All that is long does not last. All that is old does not wither, not all that is over is past." But then in the next draft, we get these lines. "Not all that have fallen are vanquished. A king may yet be without a crown. A blade that was broken be brandished, and towers that were strong may fall down." Okay, poetically, it's not a very good stanza, but
there's a lot of foreshadowed there.
And my personal theory is this is the moment when all of the Numenor stuff and all of Aragorn's role as the heir of Isildur who's going to restore the kingdom, and that being the major B plot of the whole Lord of the Rings, this is almost when it comes leaping off of Tolkien's pen faster than he knows what to do with it.
Right.
And
because bad poetry is actually not a normal Tolkien thing.
No. Well, I mean, obviously he'll go back and revise this line a ton of times until it gets to the form that we know it. But you get the very first mention of the shards of Narsil here, and of course in the final draft, Trotter trots out the broken sword as proof of who he is. Right? Yeah. So
which survives.
Yeah.
From what you read before about Peregrine Boffin, though, before we move on, I do want to mention it is interesting to see, still carrying over from The Hobbit before it basically disappears, Tolkien's fascination with the three remarkable daughters of the old Took. I can see the attraction of that. Bilbo is the grandson of one. The son of one, and Frodo is descended from another, and Trotter the third. It's a neat idea, but not as neat as what he ends up settling on. So, if I may, and I'll submit this to your correction, but it seems simultaneously with all this anguish about Trotter, Tolkien was reflecting on the nature of rangers and beginning to go in very different directions from the initial conception of rangers being nothing more than the term for hobbits who lived outside the Shire. By the time we get to the third stage version of At the Sign of the Prancing Pony, that's morphed into the idea that in the wild lands east of Bree, there roamed a few unsettled folk, men and hobbits. These, the people of the Bree land, called rangers, which is, the bit that I'm thinking, that's that brief moment where maybe the hobbits are still in association with the Dunedain, but they don't exist yet, as you say. It doesn't remain this way, and Christopher Tolkien explains that in the very next paragraph. Would you read this selection as well?
This is later in the chapter, Butterbur answers Frodo's questions about Trotter.
And this is all Christopher Tolkien, his commentary.
I don't rightly know. He is one of the wandering folk. Rangers, we call them. Not that he really is a ranger, if you understand me, though he behaves like one. He seems to be a hobbit of some kind. He's been coming in pretty often during the past 12 months, especially since last spring, but he seldom talks. In the original version of this play, says Christopher Tolkien, Butterbur says, "Oh, that is one of the wild folk, rangers we call them." And Gandalf in his letter to Frodo still refers in the third phase text, as in the old version, to Trotter as a ranger, dark rather than lean hobbit, wears wooden shoes. With these extracts, compare the notes and queries and annotation alterations, which I mentioned a moment ago. Rangers are best not as hobbits, perhaps.
Perhaps.
It is difficult to interpret this. In the third phase, we find the statement in draft versions that rangers are the last remnant of the kingly people from beyond the seas, and also the statements that rangers are both men and hobbits, that one particular hobbit is a ranger, so Gandalf, and that this same hobbit is not really a ranger, though he behaves like one, so Butterbur. The simplest explanation is to suppose that Númenórean origin of the rangers was an idea that my father was considering in the drafts, but which he set aside when he wrote the text of the chapter and the subsequent narrative. Whatever the explanation, it is clear that the Finnish conception of rangers had a difficult emergence, and it is characteristic that even when the idea of the rangers as the last descendants of the Númenórean exiles had arisen, and a place thus prepared, as it were, for Trotter, he did not at once move into that place. I do actually have a reflection here on why Butterbur phrases it the way that he does. When he says, and I even tried to work some of that into my inflection when I read the first quote. He said, "Rangers we call them, not that he really is a ranger, if you understand me, though he behaves like one." I think there is a bit of a double meaning here. And this comes from the actual etymology of ranger, which initially means basically a bandit. Like, this is not a good occupation to have. Now, there is a later sense that it gets of somebody who's like a keeper, somebody who's a guardian, somebody who ranges over a region of wilderness, like somebody who watches over the king's forest or something like this, like in the sense of park ranger, right?
Sure.
So that is there, but initially, it has to do, and of course you can see how in the Middle Ages very often one could also be the other. You know what I'm saying? You meet a tough, heavily armed character out in the woods. Nobody else is around, so he's a ranger, but he's not a ranger, if you know what I mean,
Sure.
And so that's always kind of what I've read into that bit of the quote. I'm sure Tolkien means more than it, but he was certainly attentive to the etymology of the word, which obviously just comes from range, like somebody who ranges far. Ranges far, but the cognate, of course, with ranger is rover. Right? So if you think of like a rover, a bandit, a tramp, a wanderer, a nomad, a vagabond, a hobo, or if you use the Old English version of this word is a wracha, which is what we get our word wretch from. Right? So this is somebody who's outside of the community, who's not a part of the communal life of the people for some reason. And
all of that very much fits perfectly with Strider and Trotter in relation to the community in Bree.
I will just say one of those things that word wracha can mean in Old English is also like a thane, like a warrior who's without a lord, like a ronin, like a masterless samurai kind of an idea. And so that also seems to kind of be here. So it is a word that does a whole lot. And what I like is that while everything else changes, what the rangers are, the names of the actual rangers you meet, et cetera, Tolkien never discards the word ranger because it's just such an excellent word, and it really does kind of everything I think he wants to do here.
Right.
So.
And never even completely dispenses with that idea. Not really a ranger, though he behaves like one. That this idea that a ranger is both an outsider and so much more than that.
Yeah.
The other thing, what I was going to say, I love any chance to hear Christopher Tolkien's authorial voice.
Yeah, for
and, sure. His analysis, again, reading the history of Middle-earth is laborious if you don't utterly love this stuff, but there are some gems. It's really delightful to spend time with Christopher Tolkien. So, all right. Finally, which I think you were getting towards, Deacon Seraphim, we have to note that Tolkien was greatly expanding his ideas about the Númenóreans at about this period and immediately beforehand, when he brings all of them together. But the Lost Road time travel story is volume 5 of the History of Middle-earth. So it it certainly just in the order of manuscripts, it precedes the composition of the Lord of the Rings. Although I'm guessing that there may be some ambiguity about when what is composed within there. Regardless,
That's right.
The Lost Road certainly seems to predate the composition of the Lord of the Rings, and the first draft of the Fall of Numenor that accompanies it in Volume 5, I believe also must, if nothing else, because of the use of the name Thu. But again, for all of this, you are the expert. Regardless, we're going to read this and we'll talk about it. We read it last time with Father Andrew, but as we dig more deeply into the development of Aragorn, son of Arathorn, I think it's really notable that at the same time as this character of Aragorn begins to develop, Tolkien has quite recently, within the past year or two, or even maybe concurrently, been writing the first version of the Fall of Numenor.
So the big interruption that I was referring to is when Tolkien stops to work on the Notion Club papers.
Right.
And that's the sort of big interruption that almost prevents the Lord of the Rings from being finished. And just to show like how late Tolkien is still fiddling with Aragorn's character, in the epilogue, which is Sam coming back and telling the story to his children, which is ultimately cut from the final version. But in the epilogue, which is like the end of the story, Sam still calls him Trotter. Like that's literally, the ink was barely dry on Strider's name when the book actually goes to.
That's incredible. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. So that's the interruption I'm talking about. Is Tolkien writes The Lost Road, or some version of it, in about 36, 37, something like that.
About the same time as he writes The Hobbit.
About the same time that he writes The Hobbit. But in his mind, the stories are not connected at that point. But it's when he comes back to The Lord of the Rings, at some point he realizes, hey, The Lord of the Rings, which is a Hobbit sequel, he never called it a Silmarillion sequel or something like, he suddenly realizes, wait a minute, it's all connected. And I think Numenor is a really important part of that connective tissue, because the big idea that's in there that he's really trying to satisfy is an answer to the old sheaf legend, right? The legend of men coming up out of the sea to teach the arts of civilization to the men of Middle-earth.
Which I think was your first appearance on this podcast, actually, talking about the Corn King.
So. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Corn Kings and Culture Heroes. All right, so anyway, continue.
Right. So the first version of the Fall of Numenor, which again seems like it has to have been written prior to the majority of the composition of Lord of the Rings, at least. It includes verbiage that we do see within the published Lord of the Rings, but only at Aragorn's death. So the Numenorians and this character of Aragorn and this story, they're all continuing to develop in parallel until they all come together. But the core elements are there from the beginning. So, Deacon Seraphim, would you read this?
But not all the hearts of the Numenorians were crooked, and the lore of the old days descending from the fathers of men and the elf friends and those instructed by Fionwe was preserved among some. And they knew that the fate of men was not bounded by the round path of the world, nor destined for the straight path. For the round is crooked and has no end but no escape, and the straight is true but has an end within the world, and that is the fate of the elves. But the fate of men, they said, is neither round nor ended, and is not within the world. And they remembered from whence the ruin came, and the cutting off of men from their just portion of the straight path. And they avoided the shadow of Morgoth according to their power, and hated Thu. And they assailed his temples and their servants, and there were wars of allegiance among the mighty of this world, of which only the echoes remain.
Okay. Now, there's a long road from the Hobbit Trotter that Tolkien first wrote in The Scene of the Prancing Pony to Aragorn's words on his deathbed, "We are not bound forever to the circles of the world, and beyond them is more than memory." But I think it's really remarkable. Both of these ideas are present in Tolkien's mind as early as 36 to 38. But especially like the expansion of that, not bound to the circles of the world. I don't think I've seen this anywhere in the main published stuff, and it's really fascinating to me. But what do you think, Deacon Seraphim?
So I want to make sure I don't get too ahead of the script here, as I realize I have been occasionally doing.
No.
The connection here, it cannot be stressed enough that the most important thing about Aragorn's character is that he marries Arwen.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say the most important thing, I mean the most important thing developmentally to the story for Tolkien, right? So by the time that Tolkien gets, and I'm just kind of keying off of this passage that you just read, this quote, which obviously comes up again in the tale of Arwen and Aragorn, or Aragorn and Arwen. From the time that they leave Lothlorien, the role and the character of Trotter is basically now fully realized.
Yeah,
he's still Trotter, but he's going to basically do and say pretty much everything that Strider does and says in the final story.
Right.
Leads the company from Moria, chooses not to follow Frodo to Mordor, and so on. But there was one very significant feature at the time which did not yet exist, and that was his relationship with Arwen.
I had forgotten this, yeah.
And so this means that when he first meets Éowyn, in the original version of the story, the interest that she shows in him is not one-sided.
Yeah. He's free and unencumbered.
Get excited, Éowyn stands out there in the audience. And so this is in the notes of the first for the first drafts of the King of the Golden Hall chapter. Tolkien even sort of suggests that Aragorn should marry Éowyn at the end of the story, and then he says, "Nope, Aragorn is to quote him, too old, too lordly, and too grim." Mm-hmm. At this point, I think Éowyn is also Éomer's twin sister, interestingly enough, and I think in my head they still are, even though it's not correct. Like that's still what I think how I imagine them. And then Tolkien's like, well, maybe instead Éowyn dies avenging Theoden, and Aragorn did love her after all, and he never marries after his death. Oh, wouldn't that be really grim and romantic? So that's another version that Tolkien kind of makes notes about. But in any case, then as Tolkien is writing the coming of the Rangers to Rohan, who come and meet him to travel with him to the paths of the dead, there's a mention that, again, leaps from Tolkien's pen almost unbidden, that Elrond's daughter has made for him a banner. Her name, by the way, originally Finduilas.
Okay.
Yeah. So get excited, Turin people. And which is later the name that's given for Boromir and Faramir's mother as well in Lord of the Rings. And Tolkien doesn't seem to have any clue why Elrond's daughter, who she is, or why she made Trotter a banner. There's no mention of her at all until a note from the Houses of Healing chapter, when he says maybe she comes to Minas Tirith at the end of the story. And then Tolkien goes back and makes a little revision and says maybe Galadriel gives Trotter his ring because he's supposed to marry Finduilas later. And then like all of the stuff sort of like bam, 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 bam starts clicking into place. And so that sort of creates then the whole, and it's only, I think, the very final draft of the story in which Finduilas' name is changed to Arwen and Trotter's name is changed to Strider. And then in the appendices, Tolkien tells the full story of Aragorn and Arwen, which of course is like an echo of the Beren and Luthien story. So it's so interesting to me. And basically, it's like Aragorn is almost this kind of container in the sense that he is the heir of the kings of men and all the things that came before him. He also gathers up the entire legendarium before him. And so you have these little bits from the Lost Road, and you have these little bits from the Silmarillion, and you have these little bits from like odd notes here and there and things like this. And Strider just sort of sucks all those things up.
Carries all of it.
And becomes the most awesome character. Yeah, it's like sometimes you have to wonder, is like Strider, does he ever throw his back out carrying the entire book? But I'm a big Aragorn fan, obviously. But anyway, but the reason I have such copious notes on this is because last year for the Symbolic World, among the other things that I did, I taught a class on called Tolkien and Universal History, where what we did was we took the different universal history themes that we discussed in the Medieval Universal History podcast and basically shows how Tolkien takes those themes and like plays with them and uses those the building blocks of real medieval history and romance to build the Lord of the Rings. And this is part of the reason why the Lord of the Rings is so eminently compelling in a way that other modern fantasy simply isn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, but we did a whole class just on Strider and his history.
Nice.
Which you did not know when you assigned me this.
I did not know that. Where would our listeners find that if they wanted to dig that up?
That one is a paywall, but you can go to symbolicworld/courses and you can buy the course recordings. We do periodic sales, and so on our older courses. So if you want to, probably the best thing to do is wait till we do another sale and go grab that. But it's really fun. We spent a whole week on Ottery Wayfarer, and probably the only close reading anybody's ever done in a course like this of the Annals of Valinor and Beleriand, and compared it to the Pskov Chronicle and the Russian Primary Chronicle and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Nice. And that was super, super fun. So anyway, it was a ton of fun. We also did a ton of creative writing. I had everybody kind of, we sort of landed on, let's all write a story about a sword. And so we did a bunch of creative writing as part of the course as well, which is the first time we'd ever done that at Symbolic World. So that was a ton of fun. Again, if people are interested in that, you can go check that out. So
delightful.
Yeah.
All right, we should move forward. There's one more thing that I could find, and of course you can add any more you want, but one other thing Christopher Tolkien says about Trotter/Strider, and I think it's worth reading here rather than later, although it comes later in his notes, because I think it provides us with a baseline understanding of how J.R.R. Tolkien approached the composition and development of the character. So I'll begin this excerpt, and then if you can finish it and offer your comments and thoughts, Deacon Seraphim, we'll go like that. So Christopher Tolkien writes, "As I have said, it is remarkable how substantially the structure of the story was achieved at the very beginning, while the differences in the dramatis personae are so great. It is indeed very curious that before my father had even written the first complete draft of the Council of Elrond, he had decided that the company should include an elf and a dwarf, as seems now so natural and inevitable, and yet, in The Ring Goes South, we have only Gandalf and Boromir and 5 hobbits, one of whom admittedly is the most unusually far-traveled and widely experienced, Trotter. But, as often in the history of the Lord of the Rings, much of the earliest writing remained, for example, in the detail of conversation, and yet such conversation appears later shifted into new contexts, given to different speakers and acquiring new resonance as the world and its history grew and expanded. A striking example is given in Note 8, where in the original text, Trotter sat with his head bowed to his knees as they waited to depart from Rivendell, while in Fellowship of the Ring, Aragorn sat with his head bowed to his knees. Only Elrond knew fully what this hour meant to him. The question presents itself. What is really the relation between Trotter equals Peregrine Boffin and Strider equals Aragorn?
It would obviously not be true to say merely that there was a role to be played in the story, and that at first this role was played by a hobbit, but afterwards by a man. In particular cases, looked at narrowly without a larger context, this might seem a sufficient or nearly sufficient account. The necessary or fixed action was what Sam Gamgee's companion should hiss, lie flat and still, and pull him down into the shade of a holly bush. But this says very little. I would be inclined to think that the original figure, the mysterious person who encounters the hobbits in the inn at Bree, was capable of development in different directions without losing important elements of his identity as a recognizable character. Even though the choice of one direction or other would lead to quite different historical and racial identities in Middle-earth, so Trotter was not simply switched from hobbit to man, though such a switch could take place in the case of Mr. Butterbur with very little disturbance. Rather, he had been potentially Aragorn for a long time. And when my father decided that Trotter was Aragorn and was not Peregrine Boffin, his stature and his history were totally changed. But a great deal of the indivisible Trotter remained in Aragorn and determined his nature. By the way, I call this the quantum Aragorn theory. Yeah. So it may also be thought that in the story of the attempt on Chris-Caron, Trotter is diminished from the role he had played in the narrative of the journey from Bree to Rivendell, in which, though a hobbit, he is set altogether apart from the others, a wise and resourceful leader of the great experience in whom all their hope rests. Now, in these physical circumstances, and besides Boromir, he is one of the helpless little folk, as Boromir says, to be set on a pony, of course. Of course, this question cannot be approached without hindsight. If Trotter had in fact remained a hobbit in The Lord of the Rings, it would not arise. Yet considerations along these lines may have been an element in the decision about him in which my father would now shortly take.
Which is to say, Trotter is too important to be just a lame, short hobbit who has to ride a horse or be carried by Boromir. Boromir can't carry Trotter. We need something else. And you say this is the quantum Aragorn theory, so I'm guessing there are other theories, and Christopher Tolkien doesn't speak the gospel truth. There is room for other voices. And
I think it's I think it's right, probably. I mean, I think it's a good theory. I sometimes call it like Schrodinger's Aragorn or Schrodinger's Trotter. It's just like, well, you open the box, he is both a hobbit and a Dunedain. But then once you look, then it's like, okay, now it's locked in.
And yet, he still remains, and he still retains a lot of those hobbit-like.
Which is what makes him such an incredible character, actually.
Yeah,
like that's why, because like he can hang. Like it's very clear even at the end of the book. Mm-hmm. Like when the exchange that they have in Minas Tirith and so on. It's very clear that he can also still hang with the hobbits. Like he is not above kicking up his big old legs and
smoking a pipe
up on smoking a pipe with the boys. Like, so good. Yeah, so good.
So all this, I think, basically covers what I have to say about this chapter. We've covered the origins of Trotter fairly exhaustively. We'll talk a little bit more about him in coming chapters as we see him continue to develop. But this is the chapter where we got to talk about Trotter, Strider, Aragorn, Hobbit, Man, Númenórean, what? Ranger, Ratcha, as you say. Anything else you would add, Deacon Seraphim?
I've said this before. Aragorn's my favorite character in The Lord of the Rings, or certainly the one that I would most like to be like. And this sounds like a crazy thing to say, I guess, but just in his way that he is able to, he does have this hobbitiness about him. Like he is capable of all of the pity and the compassion and the humility that the hobbits are capable of, but also he has this noble side to himself. And it's not that he's unsure or afraid of himself in the way that the Jackson films portray, and but rather it's like he's been biding his time. He's been biding his time for a long time, and that's why only Elrond knows what this moment means to him. I think that's I'd forgotten about that line actually, and then when we read it just now, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So perfect. I don't know. I but also his character is so fascinating. He's the character who probably more than any of the other characters in The Lord of the Rings, really brings in all these really important medieval themes, and kind of becomes the in the way that Númenor connects the Third Age and the First Age. Aragorn kind of connects the world of the hobbits. Of course, he is their first guide out of the hobbity world into the wider world, right? But he connects the world of the hobbits and the hobbit pleasures, hobbit joys, hobbit fears, and connects those to the wider world as well.
Right.
So he begins as a ranger protecting hobbits from wolves and the orcs at Dead Men's Dyke and whatever, but then someday he and Éomer are going far into the east. To as far as Lake Evendem to restore the ancient borders of the Gondorian Empire. That's a pretty wide range. It's a pretty wide range.
Yeah, and it's not just that he can speak to the hobbits, but also he purposely, consciously is elevating them. That's something I noticed just going through this. But anyway, let's actually begin going through the chapter. So we left off with Frodo, Sam, and Pippin going back to their parlor and sitting room, Strider having just asked to speak with Frodo privately, and Butterbur asking the same thing as they leave the common room. So, Deacon Seraphim, would you read the full beginning of the chapter? Because I think we see a lot just in this conversation.
Okay. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. There was no light. Merry was not there, and the fire had burned low. It was not until they had pulled up the embers into a blaze that they discovered Strider had come with them. There he was, calmly sitting in a chair by the door. He Batmaned in. "Hello," said Pippin. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I am called Strider," he answered, "and though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me." "You said I might hear something to my advantage, I believe," said Frodo. What have you got to say? Several things, answered Strider, but of course, I have my price. What do you mean? Asked Frodo sharply. Don't be alarmed. I mean just this. I will tell you what I know and give you some good advice, but I shall want a reward. And what will that be, pray? Said Frodo. He suspected now that he had fallen in with a rascal. He thought uncomfortably that he had brought only a little money with him. All of it would hardly satisfy a rogue, and he could not spare any of it. No more than you can afford, answered Strider with a slow smile, as if he guessed Frodo's thoughts. Just this. You must take me along with you until I wish to leave you. Oh, indeed, replied Frodo, surprised, but not much relieved. Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I knew a good deal more about you and your business. Excellent, exclaimed Strider, crossing his legs and sitting back comfortably. You seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. You have been much too careless so far. Very well. I will tell you what I know and leave the reward to you. You may be glad to grant it when you have heard me.
So I like about this, we see a lot of Strider's essential character come through just from the beginning. He's firm, almost brusque, but we see by the end he's intentionally testing and even teaching Frodo and the others. The characterization that we get of him throughout this passage and then throughout the chapter is really impressive. It's grabbed me, this reading especially. What are your thoughts, Deacon Seraphim?
The main thought that I have here, and kind of about Strider's speeches throughout this chapter, is that it's very much in the vein of what you would expect from an old Anglo-Saxon or old Germanic hero. One of the things that you're supposed to be able to do well as a hero is to speak and never give too much away, and kind of tell people what they should do without exactly telling them what to do. And all these different things. This is this kind of speech, the way that he introduces himself, the way that he asks for things, the way that he tells the hobbits to do things. These are turns of phrase. These are implicatures that would be very much at home in Beowulf, because for Old English poetry and for the old Iron Age Germanic North, how a hero talks is just as important as how he fights. It is one of the things that sets a hero apart from sort of ordinary people. Ordinary people just say things, but heroes say them well, and they say them in a way because you get another great example of this with the confrontation with Éomer and the Riders of Rohan on the plains of Rohan. There's kind of these escalating implicatures that basically begin to amount to what we in the South call fighting words. So in a society where everybody's got a sword, you have to be a little careful about how you talk and how you escalate things. But also, you can't also kind of come across as weak, because that's also dangerous. Yeah. And so one thing to do is to cultivate a certain air of mystique about yourself. You could be threatening, but you're not. Isn't it good for you that I'm on your side? That's definitely the way that Beowulf talks to Hrothgar, just for instance. And I think you definitely see some of that in Strider as well. I actually see a lot of Beowulf's character in Strider. Maybe not so much in Aragorn as king, but definitely in Strider. So
it's an interesting. I'm fascinated with what you say, because I see a lot of that same, cultivated inscrutability in a lot of seasoned professionals in a variety of different walks of life. But I'm most conscious of it with other clergy, with seasoned clergy who have that. Yeah.
It's just the young punks like us, Father, who feel like we have to weigh in on everything. One of my favorite memories of Archbishop Alexander. You were there for this. Somebody asked him a question, and he just said, "I'm not going to answer that. I'm not a." And it was something to the effect of "I'm not an expert on that," or "I'm not brave enough to answer the question," or something like that. And I was just like, "Oof, that was actually a really."
It may have even been my question. Now that I think about it,
may have been.
I don't remember what I asked, but I probably wanted him to, nail down some Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We should move on.
Yes.
So Strider explains, moving forward in the plot, that he overheard their conversation on the road after Tom Bombadil left about concealing the name of Baggins. When Frodo challenges him on why that's any of his business, his answer begins an important exchange. So I'll read the first part of this, and then you can finish it. So, well answered, said Strider, laughing, but the explanation is simple. I was looking for a hobbit called Frodo Baggins. I wanted to find him quickly. I had learned that he was carrying out of the Shire, well, a secret that concerned me and my friends. Now don't mistake me, he cried as Frodo rose from his seat and Sam jumped up with a scowl. I shall take more care of the secret than you do. And care is needed. He leaned forward and looked at them. Watch every shadow, he said in a low voice. Black horsemen have passed through Bree. On Monday, one came down the Greenway, they say, and another appeared later, coming up the Greenway from the south. There was a silence. At last Frodo spoke to Pippin and Sam. I ought to have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us, he said. And the landlord seems to have heard something. Why did he press us to join the company? And why on earth did we behave so foolishly? We ought to have stayed quiet in here.
It would have been better, said Strider. I would have stopped your going into the common room if I could, but the innkeeper would not let me in to see you or to take a message. Do you think he? Began Frodo. No, I don't think any harm of old Butterbur. Only he does not altogether like mysterious vagabonds of my sort. Frodo gave him a puzzled look. Well, I have a rather rascally look, have I not? Said Strider with a curl of his lip and a queer gleam in his eye. But I hope we shall get to know one another better. When we do, I hope you will explain what happened at the end of your song. For that little prank, it was sheer accident, interrupted Frodo. I wonder, said Strider. Accident, then. That accident has made your position dangerous. Hardly more than it was already, said Frodo. I knew these horsemen were pursuing me, but now at any rate they seem to have missed me and to gone away. You must not count on that, said Strider sharply. They will return, and more are coming. There are others. I know their number. I know these riders. He paused, and his eyes were cold and hard.
And Strider's demeanor here is chilling. Again, he's teaching them, but these lines rather burn themselves into one's memory. I know their number. I know these riders. What do you think?
To go back to kind of the careful way, notice that he actually already knows the whole thing. He knows about the ring.
Yeah.
And he knows because he's talked to Gandalf. So like none of this is actually a mystery to him. He knows exactly what happened in the common room. He knows about the ring. He knows about all these things. But he doesn't reveal everything that he knows. He draws Frodo along and sort of makes himself a co-conspirator with Frodo in the sense that suddenly Frodo turns from being from the most suspicious against him. He turns and he says, you're right. I should have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us. And then suddenly they're on the same side.
Yeah.
And then as now that Frodo's kind of been drawn into his confidence, that's when he says, oh, you don't actually know what's going on here. You don't actually know what you're up against.
Yeah.
I know these guys. I know their number.
Yeah.
I know these riders. So it's a very masterful way of like getting someone's confidence. It would be manipulative if there were like evil purposes,
But instead, he's really he steps directly into the role of leader, protector, mentor, king.
Yes. Yes.
Obviously, there's art. There's artifice to it, but it's the artifice of long experience and faithful service. Yeah.
And it's also the rhetoric of the heroic age.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with rhetoric. Like there's different kinds of rhetoric for different ages and different purposes, but ultimately rhetoric is the art of being able to persuade men to virtue. It's being able to persuade people to do the right thing, which is important if you're a preacher. It's important even if you're a humble podcaster. It's important to be able to convince people that there's a right thing, and you can help them do it. And I just think this is a wonderful, masterful passage. Every time I come to this, it is one of the advantages. You know, I was talking to somebody last night who was asking me on what criteria The Lord of the Rings should be judged as being a great book or as being better than, and you know, they name some kind of generic fantasy successor to Lord of the Rings. And I said, you know, there's a lot of different ways that we could judge the criteria. Simply, you know, first of all, the book that you just mentioned, nobody's even reading anymore, but we'll still be talking about Tolkien in 50 years, you know. So that's one thing. But I think one of the reasons it is such an excellent book, it is, for one thing, significantly shorter than all of its imitators. For all the flack Tolkien gets for writing such long descriptions of things, you know, the entire Lord of the Rings is shorter than a single volume of Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
It's shorter than a single volume of Wheel of Time. It's shorter than a single volume of most of its, you know, successor, like doorstopper phone book, you know, fantasies, hernia books, as we used to call them.
Ouch.
But there's no wasted words. Everything is actually, Tolkien actually doesn't go on and on and on about walking. Whenever somebody says that, I'm like, have you actually read Lord of the Rings? Because the thing that actually takes the most time in Lord of the Rings is always the dialogue, the conversations, which can sometimes go on for an entire lengthy chapter. Shadow of the Past, Council of Elrond, this chapter, you know, the last debate, so on and so forth, right? But the reason is, this is how old stories read.
Yeah.
If you actually read an epic or you go read a saga or something like that, most of it is actually people having dialogue.
Yeah.
And then they go out and do the thing. And but Tolkien's word economy is so excellent, and his iterative way of writing was so painstaking, so detailed, that by the time he finishes The Lord of the Rings, you know, which took several years and almost didn't even happen. But every single sentence has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb multiple times, at least 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
There's not a single word out of place. There's not a single thing where he doesn't want it to be. And you just can't do that if you have to put out, you know, 2 600-page fantasy novels a year to satisfy your publisher, right? It's just a very different goal, very different project.
Yeah.
So.
Perfect. Let's move on. So with that, I know these writers. He continues to instruct them, and he urges them to caution whenever they leave Bree, whether they take him with them or not, warning that they won't be able to continue as carelessly as they have before. Their location and their route are both known now. So this passage, once again, rather burns itself into one's memory. I'll read this so you can comment immediately. He said, so this is Aragorn speaking. You will have to leave the open road after tonight, for the horsemen will watch it night and day. You may escape from Bree and be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. Do you wish them to find you? They are terrible. The hobbits looked at him and saw with surprise that his face was drawn, as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. The room was very quiet and still, and the light seemed to have grown dim. For a while he sat with unseeing eyes, as if walking in distant memory or listening to sounds in the night far away. There, he cried after a moment, drawing his hand across his brow. Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough yet. Tomorrow you will have to escape if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have him? So, what are your thoughts here?
To me, the big question is always, how much does Strider know already, or how much does Trotter know already about the Nazgul? I know that there's a very detailed account that Tolkien works out about the locations of all 9 Nazgul and like every single day of the story.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. Totally
unnecessary level of detail to us, you know. But that's what he does. That's how we be. So and I cannot recall in there any notion that Strider ever ever ran into any of the Nazgul before the battle at Weathertop.
Yeah.
So then you'd have to sort of ask the question, well, what does he know about the Nazgul? Like, obviously, he can know things from growing up in Elrond's house. He can know things from Gandalf. But also, the Witch King of Angmar in particular is like, you know, the big bad.
Yeah.
For his entire family, his entire lineage. And I know not all of that had been worked out, you know, by this point, probably. But that's ultimately, you could say, like, the ultimate, the final meaning has to do with this. That I think it's that one of the things that you would have to learn as part of your education growing up in Elrond's house, which is where all the sons of his line are, the men of his line are fostered. You know, when you're given, the shards are passed to you, and the Ring of Barahir is passed to you, and you learn the stories of these things. One of the things that you would have to learn about is, hey, why did they have to go ransom the Ring of Barahir to begin with? Well, it's because of the guy named the Witch King of Angmar. Who is he? Well, he's what you will become if you don't watch yourself. Like, he's who you could have become if you had, allied yourself with the wrong person. So
right.
I don't know. That's kind of my meta theory for that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like textually it's just a survival from Trotter, who was supposed to have been in Mordor, supposed to have been tortured, supposed to have lost his feet, supposed to have had all of these really terrible experiences, and yet also who in the draft, the original draft, when he's talking about this, he doesn't say they are terrible. He says they give me the creeps.
Doesn't land quite as well. You know, again, it's good to edit things, people.
But
you're not a bad writer if you edit things.
Yeah. But no, I mean, we have this sense Strider's been through a lot. I don't believe there's ever a sense that even while he was, Thorongil fighting for the steward of Gondor, there wasn't. Was there ever an occasion where a Nazgul came and caused them trouble? I have a vague memory. Maybe there was something like that.
Yeah, because the Witch King would have returned to the Morgul Vale by then.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite possible that he would have had some kind of more direct encounters with them during that time as well. Yeah. Because remember, it's the very last king of Gondor, basically, or the last prince of Gondor, is the one who got challenged to go and fight the Witch King.
Right.
Never rode into Morgul Vale through pride, never rode out again.
Right.
And then the reign passed to the stewards. So Morgul Vale is like active by then.
Sure.
And so it's definitely possible that Aragorn may have also had a brush. Like, so this is where, not some nonsense about the Second Age. This is where if you gave me $1 billion to make a TV show,
another $1 billion. You already spent that first $1 billion doing
many times,
doing the Voyages of Arendelle, but the second $1 billion would go.
For the second $1 billion, I would love to, and I don't know why we didn't do this, because this was the rumor for a while of what it was going to be, but I would love to do like a sort of like the earlier adventures of Aragorn, like. When we see him in The Lord of the Rings, he's the greatest traveler and hunter of the age. But he had to learn those skills somewhere. Like, show me Batman learning all the Batman skills.
Isn't that still in the works? I thought I saw something recently about the hunt for Gollum, and they're doing all of that.
Yeah, but I don't think that's like Aragorn's origin story. I think that's just the hunt for Gollum. So I don't know.
Which is a shame. I know there was a fan-made film that kind of dug into that I haven't watched.
Yeah,
but I hear it was quite good.
There was a really, really good one that was about Aragorn's parents.
Yeah.
And that might be what you have in mind.
I think so, the Estelle or something.
Yeah, I think you can still find it out there. But anyway.
The other thing that crossed my mind that Aragorn might be referring to here, although I don't think it can be right, but within the past week, basically, he had left Rangers, he had left Dunedain of the North guarding Sarn Ford, and the Black Riders had attacked them.
Broken through, that's right.
Driven some away, killed others.
That's right.
But he wasn't there, because it's commented on, if he had been there, maybe they could have withstood the Riders, but without their leader.
I also like the subtle implication that even Gandalf has problems with the Black Riders at some point, like, things got pretty bad on Weathertop. He had to use fire or something, whatever. But then, like, also Strider somehow soloed all of them. It's never clear how, and maybe if he'd been at Sarnford, he could have prevented their passing. It's like,
it's a little interesting.
I mean, I'm cool with it because he's awesome.
Sure.
And there are certain things obviously he can do that nobody else can do, like wield the Palantir without risk, or not without risk, but like he can take control of the Palantir and things like this, basically because those things are his by right, and theoretically also the place that they're in is also his by right.
Sure. For the listener, if what follows will give away, so I'll just say, because I wasn't able to record with Deacon Seraphim as early as I wanted to, I have actually already recorded the subsequent episode. So I've already talked about Weathertop with my brother, Father Timothy. And he makes a point that I think you'll appreciate, which is why I mentioned this now, that in the movie, Aragorn, when he's fighting against the Black Riders at Weathertop, he has a torch in one hand and a sword in the other. But in the book, no sword, because his only sword is broken. He just has 2 torches. So he's just finished explaining how terrifying, how terrible the Black Riders are. He's by himself, backed up by nobody, because Merry and Pippin faint and Frodo gives in, and Sam is doing whatever Sam is doing. So Aragorn is soloing 5 Black Riders with 2 fiery sticks.
It is one of the raddest things that has ever happened in a fictional world, that's for sure. Like, it just makes, it's like you just have to go with it. It's like, okay, well, fade to black.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's a super cool moment.
Yes. Cool moment. So, to Strider's question, will you have him? Sam answers no. And Frodo disagrees, and they're about to discuss, but he does concur more is needed for them to trust Strider. He's getting ready to answer when Butterbur arrives at the door. Strider backs into the shadows, like Homer backs into the hedge in the GIF. And Butterbur works himself eventually around to the fact that Gandalf had asked him to send Frodo a letter months before, but he had forgotten until that very moment when their arrival reminded him. Deacon Seraphim, would you begin this, and then I'll pick it up halfway through.
Leaving the letter aside, I promised Gandalf no less. Barley, he says to me, this friend of mine from the Shire, he may be coming out this way before long. Him and another. He'll be calling himself Underhill. Mind that. But you need ask no questions. And if I'm not with him, he may be in trouble and he may need help. Do whatever you can for him and I'll be grateful, he says. And here you are, and trouble is not far off, seemingly. What do you mean? Asked Frodo. These black men, said the landlord, lowering his voice. They're looking for Baggins, and they mean well. And if they mean well, then I'm a hobbit.
Well, you used to be a hobbit.
Yes. It was on Monday, and all the dogs were yammering and the geese screaming. Uncanny, I called it. Nob, he came and told me that 2 black men were at the door asking for a hobbit called Baggins. Nob's hair was all stood on end. I bid the fellows be off and slammed the door on them. But they've been asking the same question all the way to Archet, I hear. And that Ranger Strider, he's been asking questions too. Tried to get in here to see you before you'd had a bite or sup, he did. He did, said Strider suddenly, coming forward into the light. And much trouble would have been saved if you had let him in, Barleyman.
The landlord jumped with surprise. You, he cried, you're always popping up. What do you want now? He's here with my leave, said Frodo. He came to offer me his help. Well, you know your own business, maybe, said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger. Then who would you take up with? Asked Strider. A fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people shouted at him all day? They cannot stay in the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the black man off? Me? Leave Bree? I wouldn't do that for any money, said Mr. Butterbur, looking really scared. But why can't you stay here quiet for a bit, Mr. Underhill? What are all these queer goings-on? What are these black men after, and where do they come from, I'd like to know? I'm sorry I can't explain it all, answered Frodo. I am tired and very worried, and it's a long tale. But if you mean to help me, I ought to warn you that you will be in danger as long as I am in your house. These Black Riders, I am not sure, but I fear they come from...
They come from Mordor, said Strider in a low voice. From Mordor, Barliman, if that means anything to you. Save us! Cried Mr. Butterbur, turning pale. The name evidently was known to him. That is the worst news that has come to Bree in my time. It is, said Frodo. Are you still willing to help us? I am, said Mr. Butterbur, more than ever, though I don't know what the likes of me can do against, he faltered. Against the shadow in the east, said Strider. Not much, Barliman, but every little helps. You can let Mr. Underhill stay here tonight as Mr. Underhill, and you can forget the name Baggins until he is far away. I really look forward to the inevitable sort of buddy cop show in which Strider is Batman and Barliman plays Commissioner Gordon. I think this would be...
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I was really struck how quickly Butterbur moves from criticizing and demeaning Strider and being offended that Frodo's even allowed him to be in the room. And all of a sudden, within a minute, he's being guided, he's being led, he's being comforted, he's even accepting encouragement from Strider. It's a moment that really exhibits Aragorn's intrinsic authority.
Yeah.
And also, strangely, in a conversation, this is in a conversation during which Strider is about as harsh in his words as we ever see him be with anyone, with that fat innkeeper line. It's also interesting to me that Butterbur knows the name of Mordor, and I wonder where he's heard it before. It reminds me of Gandalf's line to Frodo later on. If you think Butterbur's stupid, you're stupid.
Yeah, I think that... I always hate getting too biographical with Tolkien, but thinking about the things you would have had to have gone through in the world wars if you were living in England, or really anywhere, I suppose. But with the rationing that's going on, with blackouts, with all the different things, what can I do against the shadow in the east? Not much, but every little helps. Like that's a war poster right there.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what you can do is buy war bonds. What you can do is respect the rationing rules and don't get stuff on the black market. What you can do is turn the lights out, at sundown, like all these things. Yeah, you doing it doesn't really do anything, but if everybody does it, then it actually,
makes
is
a big difference.
And so that's, like it's hard not to read some of that kind of language in that exchange.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's been still striking how Strider just steps effortlessly out of the rogue, wretch, rascal casting to the king, barely veiled, comforting his loyal, if somewhat bumbling servant, or not servant, but citizen, with Butterbur. All right. The other thing I noticed is we actually see we see Frodo tell Butterbur to give him the letter, but the handoff is actually never described, or if it is, I couldn't find it, and I looked 3 times. I suppose pedantically narrating every single action might throw off the pacing of the chapter, which seems pretty much pitch perfect to me, but
pretty tight. Yeah.
Anyway, we do actually get to read the letter after Butterbur leaves. So would you read it, Deacon Seraphim? I'll do Strider's prompt. Well, said Strider, when are you going to open that letter? Frodo looked carefully at the seal before he broke it. It seemed certainly to be Gandalf's. Inside, written in the wizard's strong but graceful script, was the following message.
The Prancing Pony, Bree, Mid-Year's Day, Shire Year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here. I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon and get out of the Shire before the end of July at latest. I will return as soon as I can, and I will follow you if I find that you are gone. Leave a message for me here if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord, Butterbur, You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again. Not for any reason whatever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Thing wanted, always buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell.
And I don't think we actually need to read their response. Gandalf's letter is just delightful, how he comes through in writing. The PPPS is comic gold to my mind. It's just perfect. And way too tempting to a very bad letter writer to try to imitate.
I did this all the time as a kid. I was like, oh, you can just do that infinitely? I didn't know it was funny then. You know, it's just like, oh, I just...
Apparently I can do that. Afterthought, more afterthought, yep. And the love-hate relationship with Butterbur for Gandalf as well.
You get this, by the way, when you meet kind of like an old gaffer in the British Isles, for instance. There was this great, when I was in Scotland recently with Father Andrew, we went to this little coffee shop laundromat place to do our laundry. And it was run by this old Scottish gentleman. And we introduced ourselves and asked his name. And we said, what's your name? He said, Dad. You know, and then he eventually told us like his actual like Christian name, but everybody just calls him Dad, you know. Yeah. And very gruff, always kind of poking fun at people, ribbing people, but also you could tell like a generous person. Mm-hmm. And same thing, Gandalf is kind of that way, you know, like he's frustrated, flustered, surrounded by nincompoops, but actually he really does actually see the worth in all of these people, including Butterbur. Yeah.
Right.
It's very different from the sort of flipped. In our culture today, you're nice to everybody, but you have very little actual regard for people.
Right.
Yeah. Right. It's very different. Very different.
Yeah. On a completely different note, do you have enough of a mastery of the Hobbit calendar to tell us when Mid-Year's Day is? Is that basically the beginning of summer? Is that the solstice?
Yeah. I have right here in this folder on my computer a Shire calendar. So it's basically there's Mid-Year's Day is essentially the 21st of June. Yeah.
Because the way the Hobbit calendar goes, as I recall, they have lunar months, and then the additional days needed to make a 365-day year are filled out by days, multiple days inserted at certain seasons that are holidays, which is such a...
basically, Yule, Lithe, Overlithe, Mid-Year's Day, and yeah.
So end of June.
And what's really fun, by the way, is that all of the months in Shire Reckoning, Tolkien also came up with their Bree translations.
Of course he did.
For absolutely nobody's benefit except his own, you know. The one that I can remember is November, or roughly like 21st October to 19th November, which is Blotmath in the Shire Reckoning, but in the Bree calendar, I think it's Bluting. And I just always thought that was funny. So
that's amazing.
Bluting. Yeah, Blotmath.
Uh-huh.
Which, by the way, Blotmath is the Old English name for November. That's why I remember it. It means the month of sacrifice.
I didn't have us read the full thing, but I do find it intriguing that after they do this, you know, they say Gandalf seems to be going into great danger. For Aragorn says he's been doing that for many years. Mm-hmm. And Frodo says, well, why didn't you tell me you were Gandalf's friend? Would have saved time. And Strider says, would you have believed me? And I needed to be sure of you. And then he says, but I must admit, and I'll read this. I must admit, he added with a queer laugh, that I hoped you would take to me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. But there I believe my looks are against me. Who is this? If I can, put on the Nazi from Hogan's Heroes, who is this man? What is, he's kingly, he's rascally, now he's vulnerable, and really profoundly, frank about that. Like, this is incredible to me. Maybe it makes sense because Aragorn does trust them. He knows who they are, and he knows this is his great struggle. This is for all of the, all of the everything. This is for Arwen. This is for the world. This is everything, and these are his companions. But it's remarkable, and I wish they'd held on to this characterization and got the balance right in the movies. That loneliness. Anyway, right.
Yeah.
So Pippin and Strider then have a brief exchange about how Pippin presumes that exposure to the elements will make them all look like Strider, and Strider tells Pippin that he's a fool of a took for thinking so. Meanwhile, Sam is not impressed. Would you read his exchange with Strider?
Yeah. Pippin subsided, but Sam was not daunted, and he still eyed Strider dubiously. How do we know that you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about, he demanded. You never mentioned Gandalf till this letter came. You might be a play-acting spy, for all I can see, trying to get us to go with you. You might have done in the real Strider and took his clothes. What have you to say to that? That you are a stout fellow, answered Strider, but I'm afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I'd killed the real Strider, I could kill you, and I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. But I am the real Strider, fortunately, he said, looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will.
And with that, the hobbits fall in love with him, we all fall in love with him, and yeah.
And then they're off to see the wizard. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, this is wrong.
Yeah.
That's the wrong.
Is this the first time that he actually mentions the ring? Because I feel like...
Yes.
Yeah, it just kind of... He drops it in there. I know exactly what's going on. I could have it now. I'm actually seeing almost a... there's a parallel between this scene and the scene with Faramir. When Sam gets up and starts talking and yelling at Faramir, and Faramir says, "You should be quiet and let your master, who has more wit, do the talking."
Yeah. Yes. It's always Sam putting his foot in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Frodo's already accepted him. Aragorn has already had that moment of vulnerability, and Sam is still, he's not quite kept up with the plot.
Yeah.
And then the beautiful line, one of the enemy's spies would seem fairer and feel fouler. And then Strider, I look foul and feel fair. Is that it? And then he quotes the poem. And Frodo, oh, did the verses apply to you? I didn't know what they were about. How did you know they were in Gandalf's letter? He says, well, I didn't know, but I am Aragorn. And those verses go with that name.
And were, of course, written by Bilbo, as we will learn later. All connected.
And then he draws the sword, shows that it's broken, and hopefully finally wins over Sam. Not much use, is it, Sam? But the time is near when it shall be forged anew. Yeah. Any thoughts there with all of these?
No, I mean, I something I've been kind of talking about lately and elsewhere is the showing of the broken blade as a token, which comes up in a very important but little known these days medieval one of the Breton lays called the Lay of Sir Diggory.
Oh, it is that one.
Yeah, and there's one of the main character in that story is looking for his father, and the token he's going to know his father by is a broken sword that was broken off during a battle with a giant at the beginning of the story. And Tolkien was very, very familiar with the Breton Lays. In fact, wrote his own, and certainly would have known the Lay of Sir Diggory, and seems to have, in my opinion, that is probably
lifted
the source of that particular theme. Obviously, Tolkien makes a lot more use of it, but it is very interesting to me. So
that's fascinating. I listened to your podcast on that, and my mind was boggled by an Oedipus story that doesn't end badly. That was gorgeous, but the connection with the broken blade, that's beautiful. Anyway, I'm conscious of our time. I don't know if we need to do the entirety of Merry bursting in, save that it is our first encounter with the Black Breath. Merry swoons and thinks he's fallen into deep water, and Strider says, "I know what came over you, the Black Breath." Maybe that speaks to our conversation before. What does he know about the riders? Maybe he's
had some kind of earlier contact with them, I think. I mean, you're right. This would be in the meta history of Trotter. Like this is when he went to Mordor, but also in the history of Aragorn, it's probably when he went to Mordor. Like that's probably, like if not before that, that is when he had this encounter.
Yeah.
So.
And I suppose he did still go to Mordor, seeking for Gollum, just a different sort of experience. So either as Thorongil fighting for the stewards,
and we know that Gollum went to the Morgul Vale because that's how he found Cirith Ungol, and if Aragorn followed him, then he also knows he's also been to the Morgul Vale. So like he definitely knows what's up. The Black Riders, right? And of course, it's because it's left kind of mysterious. It's all the more potent.
Right. It makes me now wonder. Aragorn did go to Mordor. Did he actually go inside? And if so, how did he get inside? Because he certainly didn't go through the main gate. I doubt he went through Shelob's lair. That seems improbable.
I don't know that he went into Mordor, but he did. It was in the Dead Marches. Remember that he finally tracked.
There we go. That's
Gollum down.
So he'd been around, but not inside.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I don't know. I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, if Aragorn is basically, Lord of the Rings Batman, like he might have been there. There might have originally been 18 Black Riders, and he's already dispatched 8 of them with a tennis ball and a roll of duct tape. Like we just can't be sure.
Yep, we just can't be sure. We just don't know. He's Aragorn.
Yeah, he's Aragorn. So,
at any rate, I like the moment when Aragorn is impressed with Merry's courage. It's a nice. I don't actually remember. I think it's there in the original draft, and it's kind of it's a little bit of a foreshadowing of Merry being the one that actually does get a blow in on the Black Rider.
I hadn't thought about that, but you're totally right.
And Aragorn again is there with Merry, calling him back, and that conversation with the two of them is just tear-jerkingly beautiful.
All the dialogue is just awesome. Like there's no bad lines in the Lord of the Rings.
True.
Like there's no wasted dialogue. Everything is, and there's another sense of like how good a writer Tolkien is that every single line of dialogue, like people complain like, oh, what does any of this have to do with the story? But there's very little in the Lord of the Rings that is actually not actively driving the plot forward.
And it's just the gift that keeps on giving. Every time you reread, you catch up. You pick up on more of it. So, anyway, I think that brings us to the end of the chapter. They decide not to sleep in their rooms because they have windows at ground level, as all decent Hobbit rooms ought to. So they remain in their interior parlor all night long. Nob arranges pillows and woolen mats like Michal arranges them for David. And they fortify the door and go to sleep with Strider guarding them all. Now, I'm sure there's a lot more we could say about this, although we've dug deep into the origins of Trotter/Strider. But what are your thoughts in general terms, or any specific points you think could bear more discussion?
I don't think I've got anything to add to what we've already said. I mean, this is one of those chapters that bears really close study, and it's okay that we spent the time on it that we did, because it bears a lot of close study in terms of the composition history of the Lord of the Rings. But I think also we've talked a lot about what it does in terms of Strider, but it also is the first real introduction we get to the Black Riders themselves as antagonists, and they're the main antagonists basically of the first half of the Lord of the Rings, like of book one, or the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring, like book one. They're the main antagonists.
They're the big bads.
They're the big bads. Well, they're not the big bads, but they're like the main antagonists here. And then they're going to come back around later. Like the Witch King is the closest thing that the book has to like a big boss fight or big boss scene, right at the end. And of course, Tolkien is writing before a lot of those tropes are really well established for people. And so if this was, one of Tolkien's, imitators, it would be, all of this would be building up to a big battle between Aragorn and the Witch King. And that is simply not what happens.
That's not that kind of story.
Not that kind of story. Yeah, not that kind of story. One of the ways that he really excels where his imitators kind of fall short, I think. Yeah. So anyway, but I think it's a very effective introduction, because you get the reader are seeing the entire thing from the perspective of the hobbits. You are constantly moving. If you're reading this for the first time, you are, first of all, welcome. You are moving between really liking this Aragorn character and then also being very suspicious of him. And like back and forth, just along with the hobbits. But also the fact that he seems to be so knowledgeable, so capable, evidently dangerous. And he says the Black Riders are bad news.
Yeah.
Means they got to be really bad news.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So next time, we will see how matters look in the morning. And just as a teaser, that means we're going to see Gandalf escaping from being besieged in the White Tower on Westmarch, except, well, not actually. That's just an earlier version. So, very good.
An earlier version, which maybe Frodo sees in his dream in Bombadil's house, but also maybe not. Yeah. And that dream is totally out of sync for some reason. That Tolkien is like, that's weird, and then never explains.
Well, now we're back in, but I always assumed that's
the whole book about it.
I always assumed that where it actually comes, eventually he gets him into Orthanc, but later on. Well, I guess that's part of my whole theory. But all the dreams that happen in Bombadil's house, whether they come from Ulmo or whether something else is going on, but they're consolations, they're reassurance to Frodo at a moment when he really needs it. But
Verlyn Flieger has a really good theory about this, in which she connects that dream and some of the episodes that happen in Lorien to Lorien, like the Valar, like the god of dreams.
Okay.
So you might just be barking up the wrong Valar tree.
That apparently is something that I do frequently.
Could be what it is. Yeah.
Maybe Tom Bombadil is Lorien.
Oh boy! All right. Whew. All right.
Now I know how to push your buttons.
That's almost more believable to me, except no.
Yep.
Except no. Yep.
Okay.
Maybe Tom Bombadil is Mandos. Maybe Tom Bombadil is Aragorn. Have you thought?
Maybe Tom Bombadil is Butterbur.
His Butterbur. There it is. We figured it out. All right.
So,
what's next, Father?
Well, now you get to read to us. So we've read a lot from the book already, but we're pretty thoroughly constrained by the read-through to only talk about Lord of the Rings. So one of the best parts is having the chance for guest hosts to pick anything they want. That means I often hear things I've not heard before, or I'm reminded of things I haven't read for years. And hold what you're hold it right in front of your face so that we can see it, because I've got you cropped. So we've got Unfinished Tales.
Yep, the Book of Unfinished Tales
with Ted Nasmith's
yes, indeed,
illustrations.
So what I wanted to read is talking about the subject specifically of religion in Middle Earth, which is always the thing. People are always like, why is there no religion? And I'm like, dude, Are we reading the same books? Like, I'm not even sure sometimes. So, what I want to read to you is the letter that Gil-galad, there you go, that Gil-galad sends to Meneldor in the story of Eldarion and Erendis. So Meneldor is the king of Numenor at this time, and Gil-galad is the same dude that you guys know already. And he sends him a letter.
Whose son is he in this instantiation? Never mind.
He is the son of Fingon in this instantiation. All right, so, which is how he introduces himself in the letter. So here we go. Then Meneldor broke the seal and read, Irinian Gil-galad, son of Fingon, Tutar Meneldor of the line of Eärendil. Greeting, the Valar keep you, and may no shadow fall upon the Isle of Kings. All right, Valar keep you, the powers keep you. That's religious reference number 1. We're going to count them. Here we go. Long have I owed you thanks, for you have so many times sent to me your son, Anardil Eldarion, the greatest elf friend that now is among men, as I deem. At this time I ask your pardon if I have detained him overlong in my service, for I have had a great need of the knowledge of men and their tongues, which he alone possesses. He has dared many perils to bring me counsel. Of my need he will speak to you, yet he does not guess how great it is, being young and full of hope. Therefore I write this for the eyes of the king of Numenor only. A new shadow arises in the east. It is no tyranny of evil men, as your son believes, but a servant of Morgoth is stirring, and evil things wake again. Each year it gains in strength, for most men are ripe to its purpose. Not far off is the day, I judge, when it will become too great for the Eldar to unaided to withstand. Therefore, whenever I behold a tall ship of the kings of men, my heart is eased, and now I make bold to seek your help. If you have any strength of men to spare, lend it to me, I beg. Your son will report to you, if you will, all our reasons. But in fine, it is his counsel, and that is ever wise, that when assault comes, as it surely will, we should seek to hold the Westlands, where still the Eldar dwell, and men of your race, whose hearts are not yet darkened. At the least, we must defend Eriador about the long rivers west of the mountains that we name Hithaglir, our chief defense. But in that mountain wall there is a great gap southward in the land of Kelanarthon, and by that way inroad from the east must come. Already enmity creeps along the coast towards it. It could be defended and assault hindered did we hold some seat of power along the near shore. So the Lord Eldarion has long seen. At Vignalonde, by the mouth of Gwathlo, he has long labored to establish such a haven, secure against sea and land, but his mighty works have been in vain. He has great knowledge in such matters, for he has learned much of Círdan, and he understands better than any the needs of your great ships, but he has never had enough men enough, whereas Círdan has no rights or masons to spare. The king will know his own needs, but if he will listen with favor to the Lord Eldarion and support him as he may, then hope will be greater in the world. The memories of the first age are dim, and all the things in Middle-earth grow colder. Let not the ancient friendship of the Eldar and the Dunedain wane also. Behold, the darkness that is to come is filled with hatred for us, but hates you no less. The great sea will not be too wide for its wings if it is suffered to come to full growth. Manwe keep you under the one, religious reference 2, and send fair wind to your sails. Meneldor, let the parchment fall into his lap. Great clouds borne upon a wind out of the east brought darkness early, and the tall candles at his side seemed to dwell in the gloom that filled his chamber. May Eru call me before such a time comes, he cried aloud. Then to himself he said, Alas, that his pride and my coolness have kept our minds apart so long. But sooner now than I had resolved, it will be the course of wisdom to resign the scepter to him, for these things are beyond my reach. When the Valar gave us the land of gift, they did not make us their vice-regents. We were given the kingdom of Numenor, not the world. They are the lords. Here we were to put away hatred and war, for war was ended, and Morgoth thrust forth from Arda. So I deemed, for so I was taught. And he goes on, yet if the world grows again dark, the Lords must know, and they have sent me no sign. Unless this be the sign, what then? Our fathers were rewarded for the aid they gave in the defeat of the great shadow. Shall their sons stand aloof if evil finds a new head? I am in too great doubt to rule, to prepare or let be. to prepare for war, which is yet only guessed, train craftsmen and tillers in the midst of peace for blood spilling in battle, put iron on the hands of greedy captains who will love only conquest and count the slain as their glory? Will they say to Eru, at least your enemies were among them? Or to fold, isn't this killer? Or to fold hands while friends die unjustly, let men live in blind peace until the ravisher is at the gate? What then will they do? Match naked hands against iron and die in vain, or flee, leaving the cries of women behind them? Will they say to Eru, at least I spilled no blood? This is the classic, like the conflict of a good man in a time of war.
Sure.
How are you going to answer to God? That's this whole thing. Is like, how am I going to answer to God for the decision I'm about to make?
And how will my people answer to God? Because how I lead them, they will.
Yep.
Yeah.
When either way may lead to evil, what worth is choice? Let the Valar rule under Eru. I will resign the scepter to Aldarion. Yet that also is a choice, for I know well which road he will take. Unless Erendis ... And it goes on. But how many did you count?
7.
Yeah, 7. Like within 2 pages, you have 7 explicit religious references, 7 explicit references to the God who rules the world, who is the same God as our God, and saying at the end of your life, you will have to stand before him and give an account for what you did with the power that was given to you with your rule. And I really think that we are supposed to understand that this is the way that the Númenóreans talked.
Yeah.
And that they learned this, of course, from the elves. So, like, the idea of just, like, referring to Eru directly is actually totally supported in the lore. So, this idea there's no religious references. Yeah, in The Lord of the Rings, they're a little farther down.
Yeah.
But you don't have to scratch very far at all.
Yeah.
To find them. So, anyway.
That's excellent. I didn't remember there being so many and so frequent, and we so rarely get to see. Effectively, we're seeing him talking to himself, and how he talks, how he thinks, not how he interacts, but what's.
And of course, we know that the kings pray, and that they pray directly to Eru, and they go and they offer a sacrifice of the first fruits and all these different things. So
Also, there's a little bit of scariness there, because if that's the mindset, that's the self-understanding of the king of Númenor at this time. They know everything. They know who created all things. They know their role. They know the elves' role. They know everything, and it is from that perfect knowledge that somehow they fall under the sway of Sauron.
Sorry to say, Father, many such cases.
I was going to say, I think it's not for nothing, Deacon Seraphim, that your focus in your catechesis is how then should we live, not what information should we have. But anyway, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Anything else you want to say?
I don't think so.
All right. I hate to tear us away from the Hall of Fire, but you need to get to bed. But before that, it's time for something rather different. That's right.
Here we go.
It's now time for our little segment I like to call They're Taking the Hobbits to Isengard.
Payback's rough, guys.
All right, Deacon Seraphim. Now is the time when you get to play, for absolutely no prizes, a little game which will test whether you are a true Tolkien fan whom everyone should listen to, or whether we've just wasted an hour or so, or rather 3 hours and 15 minutes of everyone's time. The format here is one I inherited from my dad and his brothers. They used to play this trivia game with each other when I was young. So the game is this. One of us will read a quote from Tolkien's works, and the other has to tell who the speaker was. We can also earn bonus points if we can give the context, even if we miss the actual speaker. And those bonus points might just save us both. So context will get half a point each time. The actual speaker gets a full point. So we can get a point and a half for each one if we get everything.
Yep.
So rules for quotations are as follows. Actual quotation by an actual character. No narrator gotchas. No, it was said.
Yep.
2, it'll be a full sentence or a sentence fragment if that's all that is between the quotation marks. And 3, it will only be taken from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So.
All right.
So, I'll give you the example, "There let it lie until the end," from my dad. Now, that's Saruman who says it, but the speaker in the books is actually Gandalf quoting Saruman.
Right.
So, and yes, you get to stump me too. So for fairness, because I already got my revenge a year ago. So I was gonna let you ask me 3 questions, but I guess you only prepped me 2. So
I only prepped you 2 because I think you told me that's what you normally do. So we'll just go with what you normally do.
Alrighty. So
clean slate.
If we get 3 points, we survive, and if not, the Uruk-hai make a meal of us.
I do like how Father Andrew and I always consign the guests to be eaten, but you were in an active kenosis, a bombadillion kenosis, one might say. You were coming and deigning to suffer with us,
entering into fellowship. Either way, I also get a share of your victory if we win.
Oh, right, of course, yeah, obviously, yeah. Okay, all right, let's do this.
So there we go. All right, quote number 1. I have no idea whether these are going to be hard or not.
I have no idea the state of my brain at this point in the night. Let's just do it. Let's go.
Very good. "That was a worthy man." Oh, hang on. I failed to say something important. I have a theme. I have a category, and that category is important. The category is messages, or we might even say news, timely and otherwise, running off of this chapter. And that is an actual hint. So yes, I'll give you the quote again. "That was a worthy man."
So I know this is about one of the Rohirrim, and I want to say it's Theoden saying it, but I think that's wrong. So I'm going to say it's Éomer saying it. And I think that the context has to do with one of the lords of the Rohirrim from maybe the Westfold who fell in battle and is not able to basically like join up when they ride to Minas Tirith. Anyway, so that's my guess.
Very good.
Best and final.
So you got the speaker correct, and you got the context wrong. And now it's possible, I realized after I asked this, he may say this multiple times, but I selected this from this passage. "Your news is all of woe," cried Éomer in dismay. "Great harm is this death to Minas Tirith and to us all. That was a worthy man, all spoke his praise." So this is about Boromir when the 3 have brought that news to them.
Yeah.
So
okay, all right, okay. Well, I feel dumb about the context, but
hey, you got it.
I think I invented a completely different context in my head. The only thing that was correct was the Rohan connection, but I'll take it.
I think you should. That's good. All right. Then,
ready?
Ready or not, here it comes.
Here it comes. "Up with your beard, Durin's son, for thus it is spoken, oft hope is born when all is forlorn."
So, great pick. So great, someone else has already picked it, so I remember, because they got me with it. But hang on. The speaker is Gimli.
Yeah, that's right.
But he is quoting Legolas in the boat as they see the fire rising over Minas Tirith. But I totally got it wrong the first time.
It's a pretty good one, but I was also like, I was trying to studiously avoid a pick from the Council of Elrond because I figured you would have boned up on that one. And I was like, well, the last debate probably that's like your second choice for like a tricky quote. Okay, all right, but that's what I get for not being caught up on the podcast. So
that's okay.
All right.
So, very good. That means that we're already more than halfway there.
Yeah,
we have
right.
2.5 points because I got context. So
that's right.
We may just eat those urukai ourselves. Sorry. So your question, question 2. Why have you neglected to report for so long?
Why have you neglected to report for so long? This sounds like a Denethor thing, but I feel like that's a trick. I think that these things are all around the death of Boromir in some way. Maybe that's your theme. And
messages, timely and otherwise, is the theme.
Messages, timely and otherwise. That's right. Okay. See, this is a brain.
You're gonna kick yourself.
I'm thinking. Hold on. I don't know. I'm gonna say Faramir. I'm just gonna say Faramir.
Okay. No points. You're gonna kick yourself. So it begins with our speaker describing a scene in which a bat is coming towards him and fills his entire vision, and then he says, "I tried to get away because I thought it would fly out.
Oh my
but
gosh.
When it had covered all the globe,
Hobbit.
it disappeared. Then he came. He did not speak, so I could hear words. He just looked, and I understood. So you have come back. Why have you neglected to report for so long?"
I forgot the Hobbit was on the table.
No. That's not the Hobbit.
What? Sorry.
I did not answer. He said, "Who are you?" I still did not answer, but it hurt me horribly, and he pressed me, so I said, "A Hobbit." So this is Pippin describing his unpleasant encounter with Sauron. The only spoken words we actually hear from Sauron in the whole thing, in the whole book.
Like the report for so long. So it's Pippin's the speaker quoting Sauron.
Yep.
Oh, that's really good. That's really, really, really good. All right.
Oh, the fun thing about this is you find, passages that everybody knows really well, but you grab like the sentence before or after. And anyway,
I don't have one that good for you, but here's my second one. Who will lead us now in this deadly dark?
Who will lead us now in this deadly dark? So, Moria is dark. The paths of the dead are dark. And Shelob's lair is dark. I think I'm going to be wrong, and it's going to actually be the paths of the dead. But I'm going to guess that it's in Shelob's lair, and that it's Frodo in Shelob's lair when Gollum disappears.
All incorrect. This is Boromir says this after they are shut in Moria by the Watcher. And the answer is, of course, Gandalf.
Gandalf is going to lead them.
Yeah.
But
all right,
that's a great pick.
On.
All right.
2 and 2.5.
We have 2.5 points, but we got to get something here. So,
all right. Okay.
I hope this is easy.
Here we go.
Because I want to win. But
yeah.
Okay. Your quote. Again, messages timely and otherwise. It is some token of your truth that you also know them.
It is some token of your truth that you also know them. I can hear the voice in my head, but I think it's the wrong one. This is Faramir. He's talking to Frodo and Sam about the dream that Boromir had, which they're also familiar with. the halfling force shall stand, like the rhyme that he heard in his dream. They know the words, and he says it's some token of your truth that you also know them.
Perfect. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Very, very nice. Because the whole passage are the riddling words.
I was hearing the whole thing in Faramir's voice, but I was afraid I was like still misled from my previous wrong answer.
No. Yeah, because Frodo leads in, are the riddling words known to you that Boromir brought to Rivendell? Seek for the sword that was broken, and Imladris it dwells. The words are known indeed, said Faramir in astonishment.
And it is some token of your truth that you also know them. Yeah.
I could have done the words are known indeed, but I prefer the other.
Oh, that would have been way harder. Yeah, that's for sure.
So
I have to say, this is my favorite kind of Tolkien trivia, by the way. It is. I think it's way more fun than like the multiple choice kind. Like this is a really fun game, and it's pretty inexhaustible. Like you can only ask like name the 7 sons of Feanor in birth order like so many times. But this one's pretty inexhaustible because you can always find. And obviously, like there's an art to it. You have to make it good. Like you didn't have like look at me
or yes,
or something, or like something like that. Multiple people could have said. These are all recognizable lines. Yeah. And it's like obviously it's like I know somebody said that. Well, who said that? Who said it? Yeah. So no, it's good. I really like this version of the trivia game. I think it's my favorite Tolkien trivia. So.
I'm glad you like it. I am having a ball with it. But anyway, hooray! Not only, we escaped being eaten or looted by the Uruk-hai, and we have remained unspoiled to quiz another day. I have to say, every time I do one of these with one of my brothers, they absolutely mop the floor with it. Again, next month, because I've already recorded it, I can tell you that my brother, Father Tim, just knocks it out of the park with every single one. And, the Uruk-hai fear him, is all I can say.
Yeah, fair enough.
But for us, we've kept our legs and no Isengard for us. Well done, Deacon Seraphim, because that was a good team effort. So
yes, indeed. Well done.
And that's all we've got for today. Thank you, Deacon Seraphim, for co-hosting the Amon Sûl podcast with me today. You have so many beautiful, important offerings to the church that you are preparing, and I'm grateful that you still have time to come back to this little podcast and share your knowledge, your wisdom, and your kind but withering insights about Tom and Goldberry with us.
Well, I am very, very happy always to know that this podcast, which I love so much and was really kind of not just the beginning of my doing things with Ancient Faith, but kind of the beginning of my doing any podcasting at all, which has now become kind of like a full-time vocation. Mm-hmm. It all started here on the Amon Sûl podcast. And so I'm really happy to know that it is still going, that it is in such good and capable hands. I love the show. I am a few episodes behind, but I love what you're doing. And I was saying before we started recording, it's been a very difficult week for me. And so it was a real balm to my soul to be able to come here. I definitely always feel like when I sit down, which is always right about this time of year, I decided this year I was going to start on Christmas Day.
Nice.
And read through, space the reading out. So I read Lord of the Rings from Christmas to Easter this year. That's what I've decided to do.
Lovely.
But right around this time of the year, as the leaves turn, as the world gets cold, as the nights get long, that's when I'm like, okay, it's time for the annual reread, And but I always feel like, and I usually have this feeling about right when I get to Rivendell, which is like they're in the Hall of Fire, and there's Bilbo, and there's Arwen, and there's Aragorn. And there's Bilbo giving Aragorn a little grief, like, "Oh, I'm sure the Lady Arwen would be very happy to see you," and everyone is there, and just get kind of the sense that like I'm back home. Here's all my friends. Here's all the people that I love and care about. And for a lonely kid growing up, I spent a lot of time imaginatively, in this world, in this space. So anyway, I say all to say it was a great comfort to do this with you tonight. And I'm really grateful. Thank you so much for having me on.
Truly a pleasure.
I hope everybody enjoys another legendarily gigantic, super long episode, which is what this show is about. I'm glad to see that it hasn't changed.
Well, Michael Halda still has my record. We almost did 5 hours, and I'm like, okay, that's not possible. We can't do that again. One thing I have to say, though, to you is when you left, you said you might want to come back on occasion to talk about these.
Poetry.
And,
yes.
Anytime you wanted to do that, in a small way, on a whim, just as you're reading and you come across a poem and you say, let's do a 20-minute, talk about this. You can just record yourself talking about it by yourself. You can schedule a time when we can chat or someone else. Please consider this, still your space. If you have content you want to add to this, you're more than welcome.
Well, I have a lot of ranging that they make me do these days, but I will try to take that to heart and, at least every few weeks or so, pop in to the common room, light a pipe, sit in the back corner, looking as sinister as possible.
Stretch those long shanks out in front of you.
Stretch those long shanks. I am as tall as Strider, by the way. Just like this is one of the things that I really identify with, deeply. And this is the whole basis of my personality is being man high by Numenorian standards. So,
and I am definitely not. So very good. Anyway, we need to get you to bed, and me too.
Yes,
so
indeed.
Next time on Amon Sûl, I'll be joined by a returning Paschal panelist and first-time guest co-host, my brother, Father Timothy Cook, as we strike out across the open country of ruined Arnor and reach a very familiar landmark out there.
Could that please be?
You can send your questions, comments, topic suggestions, or orcish ideas for their taking the Hobbits to Isengard to me at amonsul@ancientfaith.com or by messaging me through the podcast Facebook page or YouTube comments. They do work. We do read them. We even respond sometimes. We also welcome guest co-host proposals, so if you have a chapter that you'd really love to discuss with us, make a pitch. Lastly, as we said, we would love to receive more photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop and the Weather Hills approaching it. As time passes, we now actually have enough photos to feature in a montage or maybe even throughout the episode on YouTube, but we are still eager for more. If you don't have any mountains close by, feel free to make a diorama of how you think it should look. That would be fun. We'd love to grow our portfolio. So if you live or work or commute in the vicinity of Weathertop, please share your view with us.
If you want more of this kind of thing, do all the things. Subscribe to the Amon Sûl podcast on your favorite podcast app. Rate, review, like, and subscribe. Look up the Amon Sûl podcast page on Facebook and click the follow button. Most of all, though, share it with your friends. And while you're at it, if you appreciate this or other Ancient Faith media, go to ancientfaith.com/support and show some practical love.
We have been around since 2019 with a rotating cast of characters, and you can find our full back catalog of episodes by going to tolkienpodcast.com. Yes, that's correct. Or just, you can subscribe on your podcast app. The Amon Sûl podcast theme music is Hidden Past, and the closing theme is Celtic Impulse, both by Kevin MacLeod, whose music you can find at incompetech.com.
Our podcast cover art was created by Samuel Hebel, and our producers are Simon Nelson and Mike DeGan.
And special thanks go to the Amon Sûl Facebook group for conversation, inspiration, and occasional reminders of new Tolkien art available to view in various contexts. I am your host, Father Anthony Cook, and even though Father Andrew Stephen Damick wonders what sort of verses would go with his name every time he hears me say it, this has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.